Well, other than we don't have a quorum or the committee chair, I think we're, oh, here comes Tom. Thank you all and welcome back. Had a lunch with the students. We discussed a number of items. It's always great to get the feedback from our student leaders and very much helps shape our conversations in the direction the board takes. So those are very much appreciated and welcomed. We are ready to start the Academic Research Student Affairs Committee. Chairman Buchanan.
Thank you, Chairman Christian. This brings the Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee meeting to session. We've got a big agenda, so let's start off by asking the same question Regent McLean did regarding the consent agenda. Any items on that consent agenda that we'd like to peel off for specific discussion? I'd like to make just one comment related to the indirect cost item. Just a brief summary, that's firming up our expectations as to what percentage of funds we receive are to be used for administrative purposes. And I would kind of maybe post for ourselves down the road, there may be a discussion, a couple of our partners, for whatever reason, aren't recognizing those requirements, and maybe we have to discuss about any sort of teeth or element of controls around that. But other than that, I don't see any other items. So is it the sense of the committee to move that forward? The sense of the committee. Regent Teal, is it the sense of the committee we move this forward? Great. Moving on to action items. I am sure Chancellor Callahan give us a quick summary of the new mission statement at MSU Northern. Chancellor Callahan.
Thank you. As part of the Northwest accreditation process, we're in our first year of the septennial process where you do the 7-year cycle now, and the mission statement was revised to address the changes for Northwest to move to the core themes, which many of you heard about. And that's basically what you see before you then is a revised mission statement. If you have any detailed questions, and Provost Templeton will be glad to address those. That was part of the faculty process. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chancellor Callahan. Any questions or comments as it relates to that item, please? No members of the board, members of the campus communities? Seeing none. Regent Teal, I think the committee can move it forward for move good. Item B, sponsorship for the Family Medicine Residency of Western Montana. President Ingstrom.
Thank you, Regent Buchanan, members of the board. I'm going to make some opening comments on this issue, and then I'm going to ask Larry White and his colleagues to come forward and give a more detailed presentation. So, Larry, if you wanted to come forward and get set up for that, please. This is a complex issue, to be sure, and so I want to make sure that we take the time to explore it in detail and get everyone's questions answered. I'll just make a few points at the beginning, each of which will be illustrated in more detail by Larry and his colleagues. First of all, there's an acute need for residents in the state of Montana. We have, I believe, the lowest ratio of doctors to population in the country. The hospitals in western Montana have the capacity to train residents and the interest in doing so. Extensive conversations over the last couple of years involving 3 hospitals and 2 community health centers have taken place. And because of our close relationships with those organizations in all kinds of ways, has been involved in those conversations. And after considerable deliberation, that group arrived at the most effective model for coordinating this, is asking to be the sponsor for the project. And that is the idea that we brought forward to you as an information item in May, indicating that we would come back now for approval of that. I want to say that this sponsoring this program is consistent with the mission. We are heavily involved in health education and have been for quite some time. We have 13 academic programs actually in the health professions, including public health, nursing, physical therapy, pharmacy, clinical psych, and others. We have 5 regentally approved institutes with these hospitals already: Institute for Neuroscience, Cancer Research, and so on. Many medical students who are participating in the WWAMI program, that is medical school itself, not the residency program, but medical school itself, they do their 3rd and 4th year in Billings and Missoula already. But I do want to make clear the differentiation between WWAMI, which is medical school education, and what we're talking about here, the residency program, which is post-medical school. WWAMI doesn't oversee the residency program, and other institutions of higher education in Montana do not oversee the residency program currently. And I will say it as clearly as I can: we are not interested in WWAMI. We're not interested in moving in on WWAMI. I will say that as clearly as I can. I guess I did. So this program has no net cost to the University of Montana. The expenses for the program will be borne entirely by the hospitals. In fact, part of those expenses direct money to the University of Montana for the overall administration of the program. So with that, I want to thank Larry White and his colleagues for the extensive work that they have done getting us to this point, and ask them then if they would go ahead and make a presentation that illustrates these points more effectively than I can. Thank you. Larry?
Chairman Buchanan and Regents and Commissioner Stearns, thank you very much for this opportunity again. In the next several minutes, my colleagues and I would like to review with you the background that leads up to the proposal that the University of Montana be the sponsor of this residency program, and give you some of the detailed information about how the relationship will exist between the university and its major participating sites. And to do that, I'm going to begin by asking Dr. Ned Vasquez, the program director for the residency, to lead you through some information about medical education and the chronology of this project.
Thank you, Larry, and thanks to all of you for having us here today. There's a significant amount of information that I'd like to review with you, including these points. And I'll move along as quickly as I can, but if there are questions that occur in any one of these realms, please stop me so we can address those as we go along. So the first piece I'd like to clarify is what President Engstrom touched on, and that is, how do we define medical education? As all of you are aware, there's this pre-medicine piece, which consists of typically 4 years of undergraduate training, adequate basic sciences, but not necessarily a science degree to get admitted to medical school. Medical school itself typically consists of 4 years, heavy emphasis on basic sciences, and then clinical training with exposure to the various specialty areas. And then we move into this area that's known as graduate medical education, or post-medical school, and the acronym GME is frequently used to describe this. So this is after medical school, and it's specifically defined as residency. That's the name of the training that people undergo in order to become a specialist in medicine. Residencies are typically 3 to 5 years. They train a person in a specific specialty area, and all students who go into residencies and all residencies in the United States are brought together by something called the National Match Program. How does WWAMI fit into this? As you all know, WWAMI was created for states that don't have medical schools to connect them to one that does, meaning Washington and the University of Washington in Seattle. So WWAMI provides an option for students in Montana to attend medical school when one doesn't exist in our state. First year of WWAMI is in Bozeman, second year is in Seattle, and third and fourth year students frequently come back to Montana for clerkships in our communities. Also, as was mentioned, WWAMI has existed and been based at MSU in Bozeman. There is no particular connection currently between that basing and the residency in Billings, nor would there be any particular connection between MSU residing in Bozeman and a residency in Missoula sponsored by UM. There is a good example in a sister state. So Idaho has no medical school. Their WWAMI program is based at the University of Idaho. They have a residency program without university affiliation in Boise, so it's comparable to the Billings program in Montana. And they have a university-sponsored program in Pocatello. So it's a very comparable model to the one that we may arrive at down the road. Where do we stand in terms of graduate medical education in Montana? This map of the United States illustrates that point. The blue states are those that are below the median for resident physicians per 100,000 population. It may be hard to see the numbers from the back, so let me illustrate it here. We are dead last in the United States in terms of GME per capita because we have the fewest number of resident physicians in our state. Why is this important? It's important because physicians tend to practice where they've done their GME, where they've gone to residency. They tend to stay in those areas because they tend to go to those areas in the first place because they're interested in them. Billings is a great example. Almost 70% of the graduates of the Billings program remain in the state. And the next slide shows you where they currently reside. So they haven't just concentrated in Billings or in eastern Montana. They have spread throughout the state in both large and small communities, which is exactly the point of training physicians in our state. It's to get them into our communities to care for Montanans. So the bottom line is, we're at a great disadvantage compared to other states in the country in terms of having a pipeline to get physicians into our communities to care for us. The only good solution to that is to create more residency slots that people from all over the country can come to Montana, attend their training here, and then remain here to practice medicine. I'm going to switch gears here and go through a bit of the chronology of how this program has evolved in the western part of the state. As you folks know better than I, in 2006, a Montana Health Workforce Advisory Committee was created by the Board of Regents to assist in increasing the person power needs of healthcare in the state. This entity has statewide representation, and it's been chaired by the Montana AHEC director. In 2009, spurred by that entity, we had a meeting in Missoula at which the University of Washington Medical School representatives attended. Roxanne Fehrenwald, the Billings director, was there, and people from the two Missoula hospitals and the medical community attended this meeting. The purpose of it was to talk about and hopefully engender a second residency program in the state. Subsequent to that meeting, a number of us from the region, family physicians, began working with the AHEC office in western Montana to explore this idea more fully. Part of those conversations led us to believe that this was something that was feasible, but it would require a very broad base of support, meaning in order to do this at a high quality level, we needed at least the two hospitals in Missoula, perhaps Kalispell Regional, and we needed physicians in multiple specialties to support training to the point that we would want it to be. Last year, the two Missoula hospitals asked the Western Montana AHEC to do a fiscal feasibility study. That took several months, but it did show that the program was fiscally viable. If you push it 50 times, it eventually changes. The Missoula hospitals then approved proceeding with the initial development of the program. So over the course of last year, a consortium of the two hospitals in Missoula, a hospital in Kalispell, the community health centers in both communities, regional physicians, and the University of Montana began meeting on a regular basis to explore models around which we could create a residency program. About a year ago, serious discussions ensued around what this model should look like. And we arrived at 4 fundamental organizing principles that we felt we must satisfy in order to have a good model. One of those is that obviously all of the participating entities had to sit on this board and have governing power. There needed to be optimal funding options and strength of funding long term. We did not want to start duplicating resources in Western Montana, so shared resources was an important point. And then minimizing professional liability insurance costs was another key piece, because those can be a significant cost burden on residency programs. In May of this year, after about 5 months of discussion, the consortium felt that a model with UM as the sponsoring institution was the best of the models that we looked at. Let me touch a little bit on why that is. One was to create neutrality in the regional medical community. You may not appreciate that this is a period of time in healthcare where there is a lot of competition and a lot of competitive forces occurring between hospitals. Having a neutral entity that brings those hospitals together at the same table and cooperates around this was an important piece of this. There's a great deal of emphasis in residency education these days around scholarship and research. So we felt it was important to have an academic home that would engender that. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, there are multiple pieces of healthcare in any part of the state, and having those interact together, especially at the level of training, is crucial to train people to function optimally in their particular profession. Over the course of this year, we've proceeded with resource and curricular development, have prepared for accreditation, looked more at the fiscal model, and we're targeting our first class of residents for 2013. In order to meet that target, it's very important that we submit our accreditation application by the middle of October. Waiting much longer than that is likely to impair our ability to be on the calendar of the ACGME, the accrediting body, and allow us to be accredited on a timely basis for 2013. And I won't go through each of these points, but you can see the outline there. So again, we'd appeal to you today to try to help us move along as expeditiously as possible so we can stay on this timeline and hopefully have another residency program in place for residents in 2013. Having made those points, I'm going to turn it over to Larry to talk a little bit about the funding mechanisms of GME. This one.
So my purpose right now would be to just quickly touch on the funding model that we're using, and in particular to assure you that the Montana University system will have no financial risk or exposure as a sponsor of the residency, and that the hospitals and the community health centers are going to pay University of Montana for all of the costs that will be incurred as the sponsor. Today, the federal government, in the form of Medicare, funds graduate medical education in the United States by paying teaching hospitals about 5% more in their Medicare payments than they do if they're not teaching residents. And in 2010, incidentally, that amounted to about $9.5 billion in support of more than 100,000 residents in all specialties around the United States. So the funding for this is linked to the Medicare reimbursement that the hospitals receive, and then it's also linked to the revenues that are generated by the faculty and the residents when they are taking care of patients in the outpatient clinic, when they're seeing their patients in the continuity clinic. The point then again would be that through 70% of Medicare funding and Medicaid funding and 30% through the community health centers, the budget, the revenues for this program are going to be generated. The UM, as the sponsoring institution, will enter into 2 contractual obligations with the major participating sites, the 5 major participating sites. One of those is a master affiliation agreement that has a 5-year length and requires that these health centers fund the program budget. The second of the 2 documents is the program letter of agreement, which is an annual contract, which stipulates the numbers of residents and the amount per capita resident that each institution is required to pay the university for meeting the budget for the program that year. And these documents involve a 3-year notice to get out. In other words, without cause, it requires 3-year notice so that the obligation of training to the entry-level class in the residency is fulfilled before the institution can leave. So we think that these interlocking mechanisms provide the university system with the assurance that this will not be a fiscal drain in any way upon the university. And so in summary, we want to just point out that we're the 50th in the nation in GME per capita. This is vitally linked then to our ability to provide primary care to the people of Montana long term. The medical resources in western Montana are such that we'll be able to produce a very high quality residency, and with the University of Montana as its sponsor, it just enhances the capabilities for teaching, for research, and for recruitment. Now with that, behind me here also are 3 gentlemen who are representatives of Kalispell Regional Medical Center, Community Medical Center in Missoula, and St. Patrick Hospital in Missoula, who would want to just offer an additional word or 2 of comment. So let me call on Dr. Eddy.
Thank you. My name's Craig Eddy. I'm a cardiovascular surgeon by training, and I'm a healthcare attorney. I've worked actually at all 3 institutions. I spent about 18 years at St. Patrick Hospital as a physician and an administrator. I've worked with Community Hospital in Missoula as a healthcare attorney, and I'm now the Chief Medical Officer at Northwest Healthcare in Kalispell. And first of all, I would really like to thank everybody for their time, for considering University of Montana's participation in this residency program, and for listening to us. The importance of this residency program really can't be overemphasized. At Northwest Healthcare, we serve Kalispell as a primary and tertiary care center, and we support the critical access hospitals in Libby, Eureka, Whitefish, Polson, Anaconda, Cutbank, Shelby, and many other areas. What we're able to see when we work with these hospitals and for us is that right now, right this minute, I need 6 primary care physicians in Kalispell. The other programs that we work with, the other hospitals we work with, need 7 or 8 primary care physicians. And we've been looking for the past 5 years to fill this gap, and we haven't been able to do it. If each primary care physician cares for 2,500 or 3,000 people approximately, that means there are about 15 to 20,000 people just in northwest Montana that are unserved or underserved for primary care. And that's why we started this program. That's why we all came together, the hospitals came together to do this. And having worked at all the hospitals and emphasizing some of the, what Larry White said about the difficulties with hospitals working together, as we had this conversation over a couple of years, we finally decided that we needed the University of Montana as a university that was that we could meet with regularly and we could work with for really 4 reasons. The first, and I can't overemphasize this either, is neutrality. As hospitals compete on the edges of their service areas and we're in a changing model, the presence of a neutral party to help us through this process is very, very important. The second thing is that the University of Montana really brings some expertise to us that we don't have. There are federal dollars that we'll be working to help support this. We'll be hoping to get. There are HRSA grants out there. We don't administrate those as hospitals. We don't have the expertise, and the University of Montana really offers that. A third thing is synchronicity of mission. Most of healthcare is about education. It's about educating ourselves and our patients. And so as hospitals, part of our mission is education, and it dovetails very nicely with the mission of the University of Montana. And fourth, healthcare is interdisciplinary. And the University of Montana really offers multiple schools where healthcare professionals can interact together to achieve that interdisciplinary work. So again, I'd like to thank you very much for considering this proposal, and all of us at Northwest Healthcare and in the Flathead Valley urge you urge the Regents to allow the University of Montana to help us in this endeavor. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Jorge Reyno, and I am the Chief Physician Executive with St. Patrick's Hospital in Missoula, Montana. And it's a real privilege for me to be able to come here and address this. This is a topic that is extremely important to me. I certainly have seen the value of this throughout much of my clinical practice and my training. My background is in infectious disease medicine, as well as in administration. And I was privileged that during my practice in infectious disease, I have practiced in communities that have a family practice residency, very much like the one that we're looking at starting. And I've also had the privilege of being associated with those residency programs. And I have seen the differences in one being very much based in a single institution and another one having a base and a close affiliation with the university. And there is a difference in terms of the experience and the type of physician that comes out of those sort of endeavors. What I have noticed personally is that in those institutions or those residencies that have that close affiliation with the university, it is a far richer experience for that individual going through that training. In addition to that, it's also a more attractive offering in a competitive environment where we have to compete for residents to come to any particular residency that we have. It certainly attracts those that have more places to choose from, and certainly that is a definite plus. But in addition to those reasons to have a university-based residency program, the mere issue of having a residency program in Missoula was really an obvious issue to the medical leaders of the various institutions that are represented here. We are tasked quite often with coming up with solutions to deliver health care to many of our communities that we serve and the residents that we serve. And there are many obstacles and there are limited resources in doing so. And we do see quite readily how a residency program is a vital component to provide the type of physicians and healthcare professionals, not only in our region but really to benefit the entire state. That sort of positive outcome certainly allows us to overcome any potential competitive differences and so forth that we may have to achieve that outcome. And so the basis of this, particularly being embedded within the university, allows us to even collaborate further in that endeavor and help us achieve that goal of the healthcare needs for our region.
Chairman and committee members. I'm Dr. Jonathan Weissel. I am an emergency physician, practiced for 22 years, and currently am the Chief Medical Officer and Chief Operating Officer of Community Medical Center. I think you've heard from my colleagues about the need for the physicians in our area. From my perspective as a physician, one of the greatest legacies we can leave is training those that come behind us and leaving a strong and vibrant workforce to care for myself as I get older and to care for the population that we serve. This residency program can provide that training. It will give us an opportunity to give to young physicians the training they need to practice in the area of the country that they will choose to practice. We live there, and we deserve to have physicians that are high quality, and our commitment as a group is to provide that training to those physicians. So I ask you to support this program. It has been well thought out and has broad-based support, not only amongst the physician community, but the 3 hospitals, clinics, and the public in general. Thank you very much.
We're open for questions or comments from anybody.
Thank you, Mr. White. Thank you, Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Eddy, Dr. Reno, and Dr. Weislow. Let's open it up as the board for discussion since there's only 2 of us on the committee instead of pinpointing the committee. I would frame my thoughts first just this way. I mean, I think the case statement, the need has been extremely well articulated. The benefit of a residency program in the state has been not only, I think, adopted by everybody on this board that I've talked to, but there's been some process questions, and I think that I think it's very important that as we go through them and get some of these answered and have the opportunity to learn a little bit more about it, that again, it's not questioned whether or not we're behind the idea. It's a matter of how we get to it and how we've gotten to this point. So with that, Mr. Barrett, Chairman, Regent Barrett.
Thank you. You don't have to be standing if you don't want to be standing. That's your choice. I think I've, over the last week or so, asked a fair number of questions and worn out my welcome in 2 or 3 offices in Helena. And so I've kind of been, I think, become identified with, I guess, challenging maybe challenging the item. So I want to say right out from the beginning, I have absolutely no problem. I'm fully supportive of the idea of the residency. I mean, it's clear our state needs it. That's not a question at all. So as Todd suggested, when I started asking all this, it was more of a process question. And the presentation you gave today was excellent. And I guess I'm wishing we would have heard it earlier. That is, it's a big, important decision, and by your own explanation, we need to make it now. And that's never a good place to have to make big, important decisions, is when there's no time left to think about them or anything. But that's history. We're past that. So I would think, had there been more communication and more of this, you may have found the board useful in helping frame this too, but we didn't have that opportunity to do that. So, but again, I've asked a lot of questions, I've called people, I've done things. We can't revisit or redo the process, so I can only say, let's have better communications going forward. There are a couple, and we get some ongoing updates, because I think from a board's perspective, there'll be a couple of really crucial things. We don't know your business, that is, we're not doctors. I'm like you, I'm glad we're getting more doctors as I get older. Actually, I already am old. But one of the things we're going to see here, and we're not inventing the wheel here in Montana, this has been dealt with, but we're going to have to be comfortable, is as we have doctors, medical treatment associated with the Montana University system, we're going to look at some liability issues from a perspective that we've not considered before. You mentioned it yourself, the malpractice issues, and how those are going to tie into liability to the state and the overall system is something we have to become comfortable with going forward. Those are some of the questions in my mind, but I see the tiered set of agreements that are forthcoming, and I guess we'll have to address them in that. And my hope is that we're kept informed about that so we can understand that process. So when the time comes to be comfortable that the liability exposure for the university system, the state, is properly covered, that we, again, aren't getting the info at the last minute. So having said all that, I'm fully supportive of this. I'm not going to revisit the process questions, and we just look forward to, I personally will vote on this tomorrow and to finding a way to assist this the best way we can from my perspective.
Thank you, Regent Barrett. Regent Robinson.
Mr. Chair, I had one question related to, well, again, I'd like to voice my own support, and I thought that this was very well explained. There were some questions I had in my mind, but by having the right people here to present, it was helpful to have the hospitals here and the representatives to fill in some of the gaps that I had. The question I have relates to the revenue expense forecast that you put together. I know we didn't go over that completely, but I certainly, took a look at it. I heard two things here, and here's my question, is that on one hand, I heard that this wasn't going to be any expense to the university system, that the university wouldn't have to put into that.
That's correct.
And that would be carried by the hospitals or other funding sources.
That's correct.
The other thing I heard was that there's still a question mark about some of that being federal funding, and so you don't really know if that federal funding will come in or not yet. Is that correct?
Well, Regent Robinson, the question of federal reimbursement under Medicare for residency training is not in question. That is a certainty once the program is accredited. The process, very simply, for new programs, if you have any knowledge of graduate medical education, it's crazy right now out there. But for virgin programs, there is a completely new slate that is available for those programs. Once the accrediting body approves us for the number of residents that we are allowed, then the federal government automatically adopts that as the number that the hospitals can claim in their reimbursement formula for payment under Medicare and Medicaid. That is not in question. What is always in question is what's the Medicare and Medicaid budget going to be from year to year. Hospital administrators live with that exigency from time immemorial almost. So, I mean, that'll vary from year to year. But the process is absolute.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'd just like to mention that I'll be in support of this tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thanks, Regent Robinson. Any other regents have questions? Regent Teal.
Hi, I also really think that this is a great thing coming forward. I also, as Regent Barrett pointed out, felt like there was some process communication issues that could be improved in the future. But overall, I'm going to be in favor of this also. I had a couple questions, though, regarding when faculty come forward in this program, the teaching doctors, how are they listed on the UM payroll, and how does that affect the overall scheme for paying faculty at the University of Montana?
Regent Teal, I think you mean the residents themselves, the doctors, or, yeah, the residents themselves. They will be on the university payroll in a manner that really is essentially the same as we put research professors on the payroll. People who are funded by an external source, whether that be a grant or in this case the hospitals, they are on the university payroll, but they are on there as non-tenured faculty members, and so they are quite literally year to year, or at least as long as the funding source is available, they are employed. If the funding source dries up, then their employment terminates as well. So there is no long-term or lingering obligation on the part of the university to these folks. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Thank you.
Regent Teal, thanks. Regent McLean.
Thank you, Regent Buchanan. I would just like to thank my fellow regents for their well-researched comments and communication before today regarding this item. Additionally, I would like to thank President Engstrom and the doctors for bringing this forward today and for your efforts, I think, in growing access for all Montanans to primary care providers. I look forward to the vote tomorrow, and I plan to support as well.
Thank you, Regent McLean. Regent Barrett.
Just a quick follow-up to Regent Thiel's question. Your description of the salary and how they're handled was for the residents themselves. As I looked at the spreadsheet, there also appear to be some quantity, I don't know how many because they're just numbers, of what I guess would be teaching doctors or mentor. I'm not sure what the right term would be. How are they treated similarly on the payroll?
No, Larry, I might have to have you answer that. I think these are the doctors employed by the hospitals.
Yeah, but they will be on, question, are they on the UM payroll, and if so,
The
how are they?
full-time faculty will be clinical professors of medicine at the University of Montana, and under letters of appointment that are very comparable to any that would be found under grants or contracts. The residents, the so-called students, are going to be paid stipends in the manner like post-grad doctoral candidates who receive a stipend. So they are not salaried, they are stipend. They get a different benefit package, but basically that's the distinction between residents and the clinical faculty who are full-time. There's a whole bunch of adjunct faculty who teach all the different specialties. They're not, they're mostly volunteers. Oh, all of it's soft money funded, 100%.
Okay, I just don't want to get lost in the nomenclature, if you will. So the clinical teaching staff, they will be, they're funded, as you suggested, like research professors. They're not tenure track.
That's right.
Okay, that's what I wanted to
LOA.
understand. Thank you.
Thanks, Regent Barrett. Before we get a little bit more comment from the committee, I see John Felton, who's the president of Riverstone Health here, and Barbara Schneeman, who right now house the only family residency program in the state. And I know you've got a 2 o'clock, Mr. Felton, but I don't know if you guys had any interest in weighing in or comment. I've had some conversations with Barbara in the past few weeks and know that they certainly recognize and articulate the value of this program very well. I know, John, I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but I certainly welcome any comments you might have as to how your program here in Billings works.
Thank you for the invitation to talk. I'm John Felton. I'm the president and CEO of Riverstone Health here in Billings, and we are the entity that houses the Montana Family Medicine Residency, the current residency program in the state. Ours is structurally a little bit different, as was mentioned in the presentation. That we have we're not university based. We do work very closely with the WWAMI program. We're the WWAMI track office for Billings. We train a lot of medical students actually from around the country, come through and spend rotations in our residency program. I think Larry was being particularly kind when he said the funding mechanism is a little obtuse. My usual description is that the GME funding mechanism, if you take all the people in the world who are too arcane to write IRS rules, they write GME rules. It really is a very strange process, but it mostly does flow through the hospitals. And then there's other sources of revenue through grants and clinical revenue and those sorts of things. Our experience has been that having the residency program does wonders for a lot of different things. One is the supply of physicians. Again, you saw that the 70% of our graduates do practice in the state of Montana. The other figure that I think is important is that 85% of our residents, again, very similar program, their outpatient center is our community health center. They practice in the two hospitals. 85% of those graduates practice in rural or underserved settings, again, mostly in Montana, but so that's rural health clinics, rural communities as sole providers, community health centers. More than half of the community health centers in the state of Montana are staffed by our graduates. It does require a very significant amount of collaboration and cooperation. I can tell you that we have worked very closely with Larry and the folks in Missoula, providing sort of our input and our perspectives on this. For whatever our vote is worth, we do support this program. We think it's really important to have more residency programs in the state. We are 50th, and we pay a steep price for that. I couldn't give you the exact numbers, but a substantial proportion of the primary care physicians in the state of Montana are over 55 years of age. So we're going to see a significant reduction in the number of physicians if we don't find a way to bring some more in. So we certainly support this. We'll be happy to stand by the university and the folks in Missoula to provide whatever sort of technical assistance we can, working through the accreditation process. We've just gone through our accreditation visit, so we can provide a lot of current expertise on that, and we'd be happy to help in any way we can.
John, thank you very much, and thanks to what you do for our medical needs in the state. Any other board comments or questions? How about campus leadership? Dr. Groseth.
I'd like to ask Mr. White or Dr. Felton whether they could express a view on whether there are dollars allocated to our region or our state which might, with the implementation of a new residency program, shift or be diluted from our current programs.
Chancellor, again, congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm not quite sure if I follow precisely your question. It may relate to the historical state appropriation by the legislature. Is that correct? Is that what you're asking about?
I'm really asking about both state dollars and federal dollars, which flow to the residency program.
Well, the federal dollars would be not impacted whatsoever. The state dollars would actually be plussed up by about 3 times over what has been historically the case, and I won't get into this in any detail, but suffice to say that the legislature in Montana has for, I think, as much as 10 years or more, appropriated approximately $300,000 a year to support the residency in Billings. With the cooperation of a lot of different parties, including Montana State University, we have succeeded in getting a rule change made to the state Medicaid program that allows an intergovernmental transfer of those funds to the state Medicaid program so that they can be matched 2-for-1 by the feds and deliver $1 million approximately a year to support the residencies instead of the $300,000. The formula that we have devised for the distribution of that will result in the out years, when the Missoula program is fully mature, of about half and half. That's a coincidence, actually, and it probably won't stay that way as all kinds of different variables change. But in the end of the day, the Billings program will always be receiving many hundreds of $1,000s more than they have been for the last 10 years under this formula.
Thanks, Mr. White. Any other questions or comments? I think a couple things that I want to say thank you, as Regent McLean did, to fellow board members for the diligence that we've done on this discussion. I know that Sheila, your staff, has been extremely accommodating in helping us facilitate that conversation, and thank you for it. I too support this. And I think it's important, and I think we've uncovered a couple of the things that are very important for us to recognize as we do discuss it. I mean, this is a new model for the way that we're going to be doing family residency than what already exists. At the same time, it's important to note that it's an increased capacity, which the state is clearly going to benefit from. So, seeing no further discussion, Regent Teal, if it's the consent of this committee, we'll move it forward for action tomorrow. Thank you all for your discussion on that, and thank you, Mr. White, Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Eddy, Dr. Reno, and Dr. Weisel for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and recognition of the excellence at the university and asking them to partner in this project.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I would just like to say
Please,
thank you to
President
the committee for your patience in listening to the presentation and for your thoughtful deliberation as well. Thank you very much.
Appreciate the dialogue. Item C, and I think I will pass this, I'm sure it's Provost Brown, the introduction of a systems ecology graduate program. All yours, Provost Brown.
Thank you, Regent Barrett, and to the other member of your committee, and then the members of the board. Regent Buchanan. Yeah, what did I do there?
It's all right,
I addressed it to Regent Barrett, but it's Regent Buchanan. You're doing very well today. Yeah. No, I wasn't thinking about that. I was worried about Regent Teal, so yeah, as the other member of the committee here, and got a little bit messed up. Anyway, very simply, the request is for authorization to offer both an MS and a PhD in the area of systems ecology. You have had this proposal for some time, since it was first introduced to the board anyway at the August meeting. This is a program proposal that is completely within the strategic plan for the University of Montana and the strategic directions that we are moving the university at this particular time. It fits very well into two of our major strategic goals. One is education for a global century, and the second one is a dynamic learning environment. It also is nested within what we developed a couple of years ago in terms of our academic strategic plan and the desire to put forward programs that were very specifically strategic for the state of Montana, both now and as we perceive its future. And things dealing with the environment and ecology are absolutely things that fit in this state in which we live. The proposal and the proposed program really is an outcome toward which the university has been systematically building over the past few years. With the help of some private donors, particularly the Walton Family Foundation, but some others, we have added faculty members at the Flathead Lake Biological Station that are in this area of systems ecology. As opportunities have arisen in both the Division of Biological Sciences and the faculty in the College of Forestry and Conservation, as opportunities have arisen because of retirements and in some cases some new position opportunities, we have targeted positions then that really do focus on large-scale systems ecology activity and brought those people in to the university environment already. In addition, we propose that we place this program administratively within an existing program, the Division of Biological Sciences, using a model that we already use at the University of Montana for our wildlife biology program, which is jointly staffed by faculty from both biological sciences and the College of Forestry and Conservation. In this particular case, we suggest that the administrative home be biological sciences, where in wildlife biology it happens to be the College of Forestry and Conservation. But it's the same model, but it's being able to share these administrative joint programs so that we can absorb the kind of administrative activities that are necessary to carry this out and to provide the overview that's oversight and overview that's needed for the program. One reason that this is coming forward at this particular time is that this systems ecology program is part of the MUS EPSCoR proposal that we submitted that has a focus on ecological science and on Montana's environment. And this program that we have brought forward now is perceived as a companion to the Ecology and Ecosystem Science, or EES program at Montana State University, which is their graduate part of the MUS EPSCoR proposal. We believe that the two programs are complementary and non-duplicative. We believe that the two companion programs demonstrate the strength of ecological science in Montana, from molecules to large-scale ecosystems. There is no similar program in our region of the country, nothing that looks like this. And as we have looked at these other programs in our region of the country, whether it's the Dakotas or Wyoming or Idaho or Washington or Oregon, as we look to see what they have done, as I say, there is nothing like this program in those other institutions, but we find that where they do have ecology programs of one sort or another, there is very high demand for those programs. And that, where I can't cite you all the specific numbers that they've got, that in conversations with them, looking at their information, that there is high demand for these programs and that they're very viable programs. And ours would be a unique set that's complementary to many of those other programs in the northwestern and western United States. One question that has been asked of us is, what are the people in this program doing now? Since I say most of them are on board already. So what are they doing now? What will they give up? The new Flathead Lake Biological Station faculty are actually doing research on their appointments right now, and they're waiting for their instructional assignment. These people were all hired with an idea that there would be an eventual instructional assignment, and they would reduce their research to be able to accommodate that instructional assignment, and that's what they will do. The 4 new courses that are proposed in the program are all designed to be taught by the Flathead Lake Biological Station faculty members, so that this is the assignment that they will get as an instructional assignment to complement the activities that they're doing in research. So they will have a shift in their activity from full-time research to research and teaching and mentoring of graduate students. The other faculty members that are involved, whether in the College of Forestry and Conservation or Biological Sciences, or actually geography or economics or other places on campus, will be, in some sense, shifting some of their graduate education and research attention from the ecology or related activities that they're doing right now to really emphasize the more systematic and interdisciplinary activities visualized in this program. And so the people that have been involved said, well, this is simply a shift in my focus. It's one that I've been developing myself over the years, or as I explained, some of the people that we've hired over the years in these programs have already been hired with as a focus, and so it's not even a shift for them. So the people are doing things right now. They're fully employed, but they also have this as the focus, and this is what they want to be doing, and so it's a natural for them to slip into the program. So finally, in summary, for us, this is a strategic program. It's an outcome of systematic strategic investments that we have already made. It's a program that is a component of the MUS $20 million EPSCoR proposal that was submitted by all of us. It's a companion to and a collaboration with the MSU EES program. And I would say it's a program on the leading edge that will help signal Montana as a national leader in ecological science. And I would be happy to stand for any questions that you have. President Engstrom left me, so, he's over here, and he will stand for questions as well. I've also asked Professor Rick Hauer from the Biological Station to join us because he's the primary author of the proposal that we put forward. And so if I can't answer a question, he ought to be able to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Provost Brown. Regent Teal, any thoughts or questions on this item?
Yeah, I just had a couple things. Thanks for your presentation. I know that the board has historically wanted to try and avoid some duplication, but I think that this sort of collaboration promises to provide some really good benefits to the state and to students. With that, I was hoping that you could describe maybe some of the methods and administration for the proposed collaborations with the EES program at MSU.
Sure, certainly I can do that. One of the features of the EPSCoR proposal that we submitted, and one of the things that we're working on right now for which I actually have a draft statement that's being put together by faculty members from both campuses, has to do with the development or eventual development of an institute of the environment or institute for the environment, where the way it's conceived right now are there are two hubs for that institute. It's an MUS institute. There's a hub at Bozeman and a hub at Missoula. And within that particular framework that we've talked about there, then we're talking about joint seminars, the sharing of outside speakers, the participation of faculty members on graduate committees on both campuses, that they can move back and forth, and we can utilize the top people that we have in a particular area to be able to advise and focus on the students' preparation in this particular program. In addition, we've talked about how we bring the faculty members and the graduate students together so that periodically, and the EPSCoR proposal helps us do that as well, or at least that project will help us do that, that we can bring them together so that they can share their successes, their frustrations, the kinds of research that they're doing, and so that they intermix on that. The other part of it is that we visualize this Institute of the Environment, and we visualize the activities involved in these two programs as further cementing many of the relationships that have already been developed through previous research ventures that have been joint, but adding to those and providing a platform for us to actually do more joint research activities, which will bring probably on an individual project graduate students together from both campuses on the same project, working on different components of that thing. And so we see there are a lot of different possibilities for synergy that are going to occur. I suspect that if we are able to get into this and move this forward, we are going to find other opportunities for collaboration that will just spin out as the synergistic and from the catalysm that gets generated from this kind of a program. We'll find new things to do together.
Thanks, and I just had one other question. I know that some of the faculty associated with this are on one-time foundation or EPSCoR funding. What's the plan post-EPSCoR for faculty appointments?
All of the faculty that are involved here are in tenure track positions, which means that we have an obligation to those faculty members long-term, so that if, say, well, at the end of the EPSCoR proposal, and if we move EPSCoR, if we're eligible again and move EPSCoR into another direction, we have the obligation to pick up those faculty members. I have a very, it's not simple, I guess, but I have a chart of all of the obligations that goes out 5 or 6 years for obligations that we have for the university to provide the faculty support for EPSCoR hires, for COBRA hires, for other programs of that kind, that where there's foundation or sponsorship funding to get them started, that you move them on into regular positions over time. And that's actually the design of those programs. I mean, that's what they're designed to do. And so I have a chart that says, okay, by this time we have to be able to pick up all of this or a portion of this particular salary. And so we build that into our annual reallocation processes so that we eventually get all of these people covered. The only thing I can tell you, as I think everybody in the universities know, you keep adding to that list in out years out there, so you never complete that list. You just move people off of it, but you have new people in new positions that are continually added.
Thank you, Provost Brown. Regent Teal. Any other comments from board members? Questions? How about campus CEOs? No, I'm sorry, Regent Robinson.
Chairman McKen, I just wanted to mention, I think, my questions have been answered, but I did want to point out, I noticed in a recent publication that we all get from the Gear Up program here in Montana, I thought that, they're working a lot with the high school students, and I noticed in one particular case that just this past summer there was a group of 9 high school students from Lame Deer, Montana, that went to Washington, the state of Washington, to study the rainforest, and they were looking at the ecosystems there. I know that from my own experience that there's more and more students in our rural communities like that that are looking for that type of career pathway, and knowing that we have that continuum set up and that this could be available to them in the years to come, I think is something that really fits with what we're trying to set up through the Board of Regents and the strategy that we've discussed. So I am in support of starting this new graduate program.
Good. Thank you very much, Regent Robinson. Let me just comment on that, because within the EPSCoR proposal that we have submitted and the things that are to be funded there is very explicitly connection with the tribal colleges. There's other outreach connections and other K through 12 and educational connections in there that help to do the kinds of things that you just mentioned in that program. In addition to that, one of the explicit parts at the University of Montana, and is inherent in all of this, is our natural resource or Native American research laboratory that we run there, and we bring a lot of students, Native students and other students, into that laboratory. That's an explicit part of the program as well, and so it will allow us to do the kinds of things that you're just mentioning. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Provost Brown. You got anything there, Chairman Christian? Any campus CEOs or members of the campus communities? Great, seeing none, I think we can move forward for approval. We'll do so. Great.
Thank you very much, Regent Buchanan.
Thank you, Provost Brown, very much, and to Rick for being here as well. Thanks. Moving into information items, we've got about 40 minutes left before we've got to move on, so we'll kind of make shift for some things. But starting with item A, Level 1 Memorandum, Deputy Commissioner Moore.
I don't think there's anything that really needs pulled out here. It's been up. These are the things that get approved in our office, and unless there's any questions, I think we can move right through.
Anything on there that anybody wants to pull out? Great. Thank you. Update on advising, and I think that goes back to President Engstrom, if I'm right.
Actually, it goes back to Provost Brown and his crew, but they'll take it away.
Regent Buchanan, we would like to make a short presentation regarding some advising and retention activities that have been going on. This will be a series of things, of discussions that we'll have, I think, at board meetings, because I know that in November, Montana State University is preparing a presentation for you on some of the activities they've got going on, and we will continue this after that meeting as well. Today, what we would like to share with you is a piece of our advising activity that we think is having some effect upon retention as well, and is a very important change in the way that we have been doing business over the last few years that we have found, at least from the anecdotal evidence that I have heard, parents and students are really enjoying. And what this has to do with is the pre-orientation advising, the pre-orientation of placement of students into courses, so that when they come to their orientation session, they don't have to worry about whether or not they're going to get registered and worry about whether or not they're going to get into classes. They can focus on some of the other activities that go on at the time of registration. And so I would like to call on Sharon O'Hare, who is the Executive Director of our Office for Student Success, to share with you a bit of this product and a bit of the success that we've had with this particular activity, which is part of our whole academic planning activity that we have been involved in at the University of Montana, and the academic planner that we have prepared, which is a very robust instrument. So with that, I'll call and ask for Sharon O'Hare to come forward.
Regent Buchanan, members of the board, thank you for this opportunity to talk about something that we're quite excited about at the University of Montana. We just completed our second year of this initiative, and I have some things to report and some things to explain. So I think first of all, I need to find my clicker, but the first thing to say about our freshman registration initiative is that it is the result of a very strong and enduring partnership between a number of administrative units on our campus. My office, the Office for Student Success, Enrollment Services and Admissions, Information Technology, and the Office of the Registrar. And without that kind of close and daily cooperation and coordination, I don't believe we'd be able to have done this. So the first thing to talk about is why did we feel there was a need for change in how we were having freshmen register themselves for their first semester of courses. So I'm going to explain just a few minutes how we used to do it in the past. First, prior to 2010, we had 3 on-campus 2-day orientations that would take place during the summer, and then there was one in the fall that occurred immediately before classes began. In the past, those students would show up for an orientation, take their placement test while they were on campus for orientation, learn how to use the course registration system while they were on campus, meet with a department advisor while they were on campus, and then on Friday afternoon they would be required and expected to build a complete fall semester schedule for themselves. For many of the students and the parents, it was one of those high stakes and high anxiety filled experiences. And it was also true that in the past, for some of those high demand freshman courses, and I'm thinking particularly of chemistry and some of the math courses, that with each passing orientation date, we had a lower supply of remaining course seats available from which to build a schedule. So my colleague, Assistant Vice President for Enrollment Services, Jed Liston, did some research a couple of years ago, and what it showed was that those students who came to a summer orientation, their freshman to sophomore retention rate was around 80%, as compared to those students who came to that final fall orientation, their freshman to sophomore retention rate was 69%. And one of the truths about those students that came for fall orientation is that those were our poorest students. Those were the students who could not afford to come to campus twice. They couldn't afford to take time off from work in the summer. They couldn't afford to come to campus in June with their family, have the hotel room, and then go back home and then return again to to moving in the fall. And so it became a matter of pressing equity, that we have a commitment to provide equal access to courses for all of our incoming freshmen, regardless of their socioeconomic status. So that was the initial compelling reason why we had to look at a different way to register our students. But then there's another reason that comes into play, and that has to do with student success. That what we know about student retention is that first year, and in particular that first semester, is an opportunity for those students to engage with their major, to engage with each other, to engage with their new academic community. And what we wanted to do as a university was to do the heavy lifting for those students by providing that first semester schedule for them, by at least getting them started off in the courses that they needed for their major. So how did we do it? Well, the first thing we had to do was decide what the core courses were for each one of the 62, 63 different major programs that we had. So we had a process of asking all academic departments to define for their incoming freshmen what courses did they want their students to take. Now, I've pulled up 3 here to use as an example. There are 59 behind them that I didn't think you necessarily needed to see all of them. But what you can see is that each department has defined not only the courses within their own program, so for political science, they want their students either to take Intro to American Government or Intro to International Relations, but also many majors also specify courses that are not within their program but are required for their major. So wildland restoration core courses include a course in Introduction to Chemistry. We also, at the time that we started this, had a provost who is now our president who said that every incoming freshman shall take a math course if they haven't already entered, if they're not entering with college level math credit. And so we affirmatively register every student who comes in as a freshman into the appropriate level college math. And we do that based on not only their results of a math placement test or math courses that they've taken in high school, but also based on the math course that is appropriate for their major. One thing that always comes up when we talk about core courses is what are we doing for the general studies student? What are we doing for the student that is undeclared? Are they left outside of this process because they don't actually have a core? And the answer to that is no. General studies students are asked to complete a very extensive academic interest survey, in which case they actually end up creating their own core as driven by their potential major interests. And so Unlike the past, when some general studies students were left kind of floundering, particularly in the fall orientation, in terms of finding courses that they wanted, we affirmatively register those undeclared students in the courses that will allow them to explore their various interest areas and get that one step closer to declaring a major. So now we have the core courses. This is what the timeline looks like. Our philosophy is that in the spring, that the incoming UM freshman begins their freshman year in the spring of their senior year in high school. And so what we do is we welcome them to the university academic community. We encourage them and invite them to log on to My Academics, which is a web portal site for them. They have a list of tasks to complete, including placement tests, math and chemistry tests are taken online. That academic interest questionnaire, those are specific for each major. So for example, you saw in the political science core courses that a student has the choice to take Intro to Government or International Relations. Those poli-sci majors, when they fill out that academic interest questionnaire, that's when they tell us which course they'd like to take. Then the next step is where the rubber meets the road. That's June 1st through June 20th. And that's when our team of academic advisors build individual schedules, one at a time, for each incoming freshman. We use a number of tools, and in fact, if we didn't have the information technology tools in our toolbox, we wouldn't be able to do this. We have My Academics. I'll show you a screenshot of that in a second. That is our web portal page. We also have Academic Planner and Registration Dashboard. I wanted to make sure I had the right numbers here.
Can we interrupt you for 1 second?
I just wanted to ask a question about this.
Absolutely.
Is this prospective or this is going on right now?
We just finished our second year. This is going on right now.
What's the participation rate in that step 2 and 3? I mean, they're back in high school. I mean, does the process sort of force them to do it? Is it a high rate?
It's really hard to force a senior in high school to do anything, but we are very proactive in terms of communicating with them, emailing them, calling them. Their parents are also on our emailing list, and so they find out about it. If I might, what I'll do is just give you a quick snapshot. And in fact, I have a handout that better captures what the My Academics page looks like. But this is what once a student has registered for an orientation, they're invited to log on to the My Academics website. And this is a part of what they see. Also contained on that site is their to-do list of tasks, what we know about them. In my case, I was an economics major. It shows my SAT, my ACT scores, my math placement scores. It also tells me what my core courses are. It is quite a process to have those students engage with us that early, and that's why it's so important to have admissions as our partner in doing this, because they're great.
Yeah, so what kind of percent participation are you getting?
I was looking at the numbers. For the first 3 orientations that we had 1,520 students who registered for an orientation. We were able to register before orientation 1,380 of these incoming freshmen. It was a lot of work and a lot of coordination and collaboration, but we're really happy about that, particularly the second year. The first year we didn't have as much participation, and this year we were really able to ramp it up. So I go back just a second. So here we are, registering those 1,380 incoming freshmen, and the registration is being done by academic advisors, and they're looking at the students' response to the academic interest questionnaire, they're looking at the students' ACT scores, and they're looking at their placement test results in order to build the schedule for these students. And then finally, in the summer, is when a student comes and they complete their registration. So I want to point out that we're not registering the students for every course they're going to take in the first semester. We're registering them for those core courses, the courses they need to be taking in their major. And the core course credit loads vary. It depends on the major. Poli-sci, I think the credit load is around 6 credits per student for a typical core course load. Pharmacy, pre-pharmacy, I think it's 15. So students arrive with different levels of registration, depending, of course, on their major, and then they have the freedom to add in general education courses, add in electives, and they also have the freedom to make changes to their course schedule if they want. If they want a different section of chemistry that meets at a different time, they're free to make those kinds of changes when they come for summer orientation. Now, what do we do about those students who couldn't afford to come to one of those on-campus orientations? We have something we call GEAR Online, which stands for Gen Ed Advising and Registration Online. This past summer, we had 500 students who participated in this online registration period. This happened during the last, I think the first couple of weeks in July. And those students were each assigned an academic advisor, their summer online advisor, who had an online advising appointment with them, either by phone or by Skype, and together they completed that student's registration. Okay. And as I mentioned, I think we're going to come back and present a little bit more at a future date on some of these technology tools that we've developed, but one is Academic Planner. If I'm an advisor and I'm building a schedule for Kelly, this is the tool that I use. It's outside of our course registration system, but tied into Banner. But this is what I would use to build a schedule for Kelly, who looks like she's a music major, and then would take that information and then register Kelly in real time in our student registration system. Academic Planner just received one of 6 National Innovators Awards from Campus Technology. And the CIO, Loie Knapp, and I are on the road giving presentations at EDUCAUSE and other places on Academic Planner. It really is innovative. And I actually didn't understand how innovative it was until we started winning awards. So, our results. This is for this past summer. We just finished. For the first orientation, you can see that we got nearly all of the 460 students registered for the first orientation. Again, 500 for ORI 2, and then for ORI 3, and that, as you would expect, is probably the most difficult one to have students engage with you, because many of these students are out of state. They haven't even come to campus yet. They may never have been on campus. But even at that, we were able to engage with 426 of those students, were on My Academics, and did what they needed to do so we could register them before they came here in the fall. And then finally, as you can see, we had around 200 students for fall orientation, and even those, even though we don't yet have a formal way to register in advance of orientation, those students, even 36 of those we were able to register in a freshman interest group. And to me, this is really interesting, that if you look at those first 3 orientations and look at the average credit load taken per student, you see that we're hovering around the 14.7 credits per student. And then look at those fall orientation students who we weren't able to register in advance of coming to campus, and their average credit load is around 13. So to me, it's not solely due to the fact that we're registering these students in advance. There are other things that come into play. But what I think is important is that by taking that step, doing that heavy lifting for those students and registering in their core, we're actually making it possible for those students to take more courses, to get up to that, what we want is that average 15 credits per semester, so that we can get that 4-year graduation. So here's what we think the benefits, at least 3 of the benefits of this pre-orientation registration are. One of the things is that intrusive advising is embedded in those core courses, that by defining what those core courses are, we have, in effect, done the advising for the departments in advance of the students having that first face-to-face conversation with the departments. So that when a student is meeting with their departmental advisor during orientation, they're not going through a laundry list of courses you need to take. They're talking about academic enrichment opportunities in biology. They're talking about how to plan for study abroad and still graduate in 4 years. We've answered that question about what is it I need to take, and now it's on to what do I do with a major in this field. Another thing that we're doing is that, and I think the metaphor is this, that we actually lay down that first footprint for the student in that 4-year path to graduation. that we want them to get off on a strong start and ensure that they can graduate in 4 years. And by having the departmental level of involvement that we have in defining those core courses, and by taking that affirmative step and securing those courses for those students, that we're making that happen. And then another benefit for doing this initiative is the fact that it really does facilitate course supply management, that during that intensive 2 or 3 weeks in June when we are having advisors register students in advance, we can tell when we're running out of sections of college algebra. We know when we need to create another section of chemistry lab. And we know at the time, long before the student gets here, we know how to manage the resources that we have. Our next steps, well, one, we're going to continue doing this. We think it's successful. We think it's leading to good results. I'm anxiously awaiting to find out last year's freshman to sophomore retention rate, because that would represent the first year that we've done this. So we're curious to find out if that has any effect on that number. We also plan to extend it to our COT students for the summer of 2012. And we're looking at a way, we think we've got it figured out, how to address those fall orientation students who were left out this time. We think we can create a mechanism by which even for those late deciders, we can have them registered in their core before they come to campus. As part of our planning and assessment continuum, we'll continue to assess the initiative's impact on retention and graduation rates. And one of the things, and this gets back to what Regent Barrett was pointing out, is the need to have integrated and expanded communication platforms with the students and their parents. What we say at UM, or what I say during parent orientation, is that I never tell parents we're going to cut the cord, that we're asking them to cut the cord with their student. I tell them that they are the cord that connects them, that connects their student to us. And so what we found is having a very robust conversation and communication with parents is essential to having this work, because as a senior in high school, at least nominally, the student is still under the parent's control at that point. I think that's it. So I'm happy to take any questions that the board may have at this point.
Any questions or comments from members of the board? Regent McLean.
Thank you. That was a real interesting and exciting presentation. I apologize if I missed this, but I'm wondering if you can tell me a little bit about how the advisors are chosen and how they're paired with the advisees, and what is the ratio there. And I apologize if I missed it. I was trying to find things on your website.
Certainly. You're talking about during the online summer advising portion of it?
Yes.
So that's 500, we have 500 students during that time, 15 professional academic advisors, the majority of which are professional advisors through the Undergraduate Advising Center. We all have areas of specialty. They actually, our Director of Undergraduate Advising actually did give me a caseload this summer, which was of math. She figured I couldn't mess with that too much. So they're all assigned based on their level of expertise. So we have academic advisors in the UAC who focus on pre-med, so they have all the science majors. We have academic advisors that are pre-psychology specialists, so they get the social scientists. They're all working off the core course group for their department. So the advising caseloads with 15 ended up being around 30 to 50 advisees per advisor. We did it over a 3-week period. All the students were notified of the name and the contact information for their academic advisor. Their academic advisor would call them, make an appointment to when are we going to get together to have our advising appointment online. We had several advisors that did it via Skype, and it seemed to work quite well.
Thank you for that. I guess I'm wondering now, too, along that same advisor vein, do you plan to collect data about follow-up as these students progress through the system with those advisors?
Well, the advisors during the summer are strictly their summer online advisors. So within the Undergraduate Advising Center, for example, I was the summer advisee for math majors. But once a student comes to campus, then math majors are advised through the mathematics department. So they take over from there. And so, yes, as part of the assessment process, we'll continue to track throughout the students' progress at the university, their experience of academic advising. And that's part of the assessment plan that we're preparing right now, is to go particularly to those online students and say, what was your experience of this, and did it work well for you to work with an online advisor? Was Skype preferable to email, to telephone, and those kinds of things?
Thank you.
Thanks, Regent McLean. Any other, Commissioner Stearns?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have kind of a question that I put in conversation yesterday to President Engstrom and to President Cruzado. I know that the MSU campuses are working on degree works, and you mentioned it earlier, but I'm learning this isn't quite so much for you, probably, as for the two presidents. Just quickly, they're not quite the same, or they're actually quite different. Degree works, and then this
academic planner.
Academic planning, right. Either of you care to comment to help flesh that out for me?
Sure. Commissioner Stearns, members of the board, academic planner and degree works are not really the same, but there is some overlap there, and Sharon might be able to provide a little more detail on that. Academic planner has been designed as sort of the upfront tool to get students into the right classes, whereas degree works is more of a degree audit module, is my understanding, so it'd be sort of a later process module. But there is some overlap, and at least what Sharon was telling me earlier is that academic planner could be built upon to make it function also as a degree audit module. That's a possibility. So Sharon, do you want to comment more on that?
Yeah, and I believe we had a meeting about this a month ago to talk about the options for degree audit system for us. Academic planner has the capability to have degree templates added to it. What you saw a few minutes ago was just the look of one student building a schedule, and these are the courses the student is registered for. But imagine if for that student's major, the template could be populated with the courses not only that the student has already taken, but the student has planned to take and is stored in academic planner. And then that degree audit becomes part of an advising conversation that the student would have with their academic advisor, because what you would want is to have the capability for the advisor to say, well, this is an acceptable substitution for that, and there's an electronic checkoff and signature part that goes into it, and then you have some sort of record of that academic advising conversation. All of those kinds of capabilities either already exist in academic planner or are on the drawing board and are viewed as highly feasible.
Thanks, Ms. O'Hare. Regent McLean.
My interest is piqued, so thank you. This is great stuff. I just have one final question. Has there been communication with high school counselors regarding what's happening with the academic planner?
There's been a lot of communication with high school counselors on the part of admissions with regard to this whole freshman registration initiative, because we have changed the way that they understand how registration took place. So admissions has worked quite closely with the counselors over the last 2 years to communicate that to them, because they're also part of our process for bringing these seniors into the My Academics fold. And I'm not aware to the extent at which we're communicating with high school counselors with regard to academic planner per se. But I do know that we have quite a communication effort underway, just explaining the freshman registration at the University of Montana.
Thank you. It seems like sometimes we graduate our students, and at graduation day we wish them well, and that's the end of their relationship with their high school counselor. And I am just imagining that there may be a great opportunity for a partnership here with some of those counselors. Thank you for your effort.
Thanks, Regent McLean. Other comments or thoughts? Thank you very much for the prepared presentation. And as a reminder, this topic of advising. Thanks very much to Deputy Commissioner Moore is something that we're going to spend a lot of time on and focusing in this committee, as I, for one, believe that I've heard from the students numerous times that this is a set of resources that not only can we get better at, but they need to be more informed upon to help their fellow students continue to pump up success rates. So, Sylvia, thank you very much for plugging this into the agenda. Boy, I like these two dudes, Bill Muse and Jim Ripaw. Deputy Commissioner Tyler Trevor is going to lead a conversation somewhat in line with the discussion we had with the students over lunch today about the entire planning process around the cost of education, how and when we go about implementing, discussing tuition issues, for example. But we believe that the first step is to give us a little bit of context about where we're at. And with that, Deputy Commissioner Trevor.
Thank you, Chairman Buchanan, members of the board. Good afternoon. First, start off with an update on the Affordability Subcommittee and a reminder of what the charge for that committee is. Regent Buchanan just sort of mentioned that. There's three basic tenets here, and the first one is to utilize data to recommend strategies to improve affordability, recommend approaches for improving communications of affordability and outreach, and recommend policies to facilitate a more coordinated system of financial aid. We list some tasks here just to put a little bit more tangibility to what that means. The first one, which will hopefully accomplish some of that today, which is increased system-wide use and understanding of financial aid information. Some other items, definitely related to today's presentation, provide analysis and information on increasing student loan amounts. I think you're going to find this presentation equally as interesting as the one that we talked about, price and affordability, in May. And I'll leave the rest of them there for you to read, but it basically comes down to kind of reshaping the portion of affordability within the Montana University System strategic plan at the end of the day, and the strategies that help us create a more affordable system. So with that, the work plan, it's real simple. For the first third of this, we're going to dedicate our time spending on data analysis to isolate the key issues. So right now it's a committee of three, myself, Bill Muse, and Jim Rimpaw. We're working with the data. That's what we're bringing to you today and at the next board meeting in November. By January, we'll bring together a group, a much larger group, including financial aid directors, more data folks, some student services people, to review our policies and come up with strategies. And finally, toward the end of this current academic year, we'll bring back some policy recommendations. So, one more slide here before we get into the presentation. This is sort of the template in which we're operating under, and it's affordability. It's not just tuition. There's this multi-dimensional relationship between family resources, cost of attendance, and financial aid. And you'll see that play out here in this presentation. And in fact, as a quick review from the May presentation, we took a look at net tuition, and you remember this slide. And net tuition is the amount that we charge students minus the average amount of financial aid that all students receive. And in the last 5 years, our net tuition has been decreasing. So just by looking at tuition and fees, you could say right now is a pretty affordable time to attend the Montana University System. But of course, we know it's more than just tuition and fees. It's also the price of attendance, which includes tuition and fees, but also adds in room and board and books and supplies. And then you subtract the average amount of financial aid received. And what do we see? Well, we see a slightward upward growing trend here in price. To be expected. This is inflation, basically. But the third slide, again, remember, this is the one that really kind of caught our attention at the last meeting, is regardless of the fact that net tuition has gone down and price of attendance hasn't increased all that much, the average amount that a first-time, full-time resident student will take out in loans is continually growing to a point now, we're up to $6,700 in that first academic year for the average amount a first-time, full-time resident student will take out in loans. So, leaving the last meeting, this is on my mind, and thinking, how can we better flesh this out for the board? So, I came across a new study on student success and borrowing. And what you see on the board here is a borrowing to credential ratio. It's a lot like what I presented earlier today on expenditures per completion, but rather we're taking the total amount borrowed in the Montana University system and dividing the number of credentials into it to come up with a ratio. So it'll give us an idea of, given the number of students that earn degrees, what's the level of borrowing that occurs in the Montana University system. And I knew we were high, but I was shocked to see that we're the 5th highest in the nation on this ratio. But don't get confused that this is the average amount that a student borrows over the life of their time in higher ed. This is just all the amount of borrowing that occurred in a year divided by the total number of credentials. So after thinking about that, we had to unpack this. What's going on here? Are our students actually borrowing more? Are we producing very few credentials? What's the scenario here? Basically take the numerator and the denominator and figure out what's going on. That's where I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart, Bill Muse, here to help unpack some of this stuff.
Okay, so as Tyler said, if you're going to take a look at a ratio and try to understand it, you have to, first of all, start with the fundamental concept that a ratio is a numerator and a denominator. So if our ratio is too high, that means the numerator is too high relative to the denominator. So let's look at the numerator first. Let's go back just 1 second there. There we go. So looking at the numerator first, we know that there's some combination of these two things going on in all likelihood. The Montana University system graduates are borrowing individually more than the average when you look at national data, and or that more of our graduates on average borrow money. So let's look at that. So first of all, let's just look at MUS data. And we're looking here now at the three fundamental levels of credential. And you can see that for certificate degree recipients, or certificate recipients, you can see that 65% of our students are borrowing, and that on average they're borrowing about $12,000. Similarly, if you look at associate degree students, you can see that 69% of those students borrow, and that on average they are borrowing $17,397 per credential. And if we look at baccalaureate degrees, you can see that that's 63% and $22,800. Now, in just a second, we're going to need to look at how does that relate to the benchmarks, but just look at the relationship between those three numbers. Think about it for a second. Not only in terms of the potential return on investment comparatively across those three credentials, but just think about what you would expect for a 4-year degree versus a 1-year or less certificate, or for a 2-year degree. And you can see that it seems as if those certificates and associate degrees are causing folks to borrow a lot more money proportionally than they should. Okay, let's look at the benchmarks. Okay, so now let's focus for a second on the bachelor's degree recipients. And as same numbers you just saw a second ago, on average, our students are borrowing $22,811, 63%, so roughly 2/3 of them are doing the borrowing. And let's compare that to national data. Well, it turns out that nationally, the average is about $19,800, and that about 55% of students borrow. So what that means is, back to our original questions, it means that both things are true. Individual students are borrowing more, and more of our students are borrowing than the national average. All right? So let's keep looking. So why would that be? What would contribute to those two factors? Well, so let's just think about it. Well, could it be that our tuition and fees are too high? That's the part we frankly have spent the most time on in terms of really focusing on board policy and public policy. And if you look at it, compared to WICHE averages, if you look at it compared to national averages, if you look at it compared to any other sort of absolute benchmark, the answer is generally no. Our 4-year tuition and fees, especially, again, if you think, is that what's causing this other issue? And if you compare that to those states that we are higher than in terms of this borrowing, no, our tuition and fees are actually, for the most part, lower. Now, where 2-year education is concerned, we're a little bit higher than the average, but for 4 years, certainly that's not the case. Now, then if we look at, well, all right, what about median household income? We know that Montana income is low, and the answer is yes, that's got to be a factor. We know that Montana ranks 48th in the nation in median household income, so certainly that is a factor. Ratio of tuition fees to median household income, well, again, if you look at that ratio, although our absolute level of tuition is not high, when you compare it to the median household income, we are higher than the average. So certainly that's contributing to it. But there's another factor, and that is the low amount of state-funded need-based aid. Montana has about half of the amount per student average compared to the WICHE states. So that's certainly a factor. And then the high student share of the cost of education is certainly a factor. Okay, so now we know that, essentially that's telling us what's going on with the numerator. Now let's start to look at the denominator. Could it also be, and we have to look at this, could it also be that the Montana University system really isn't graduating enough students relative to the size of the enrollment? I mean, because if we're really not doing a good job of producing credentials in students, then that would certainly have an impact. So let's take a look at that. So it turns out that, you know what, that's not a problem. I mean, here are the 50 states arrayed, and this is one of the places where we look very good. On average, the U.S. average is 13 undergraduate completions per 100 undergraduates enrolled, and Montana is about 10th in the nation with 16.2. So that's not the problem. It's not that we are not getting the completions. And I'm going to let Tyler.
This has been something that sort of perplexes us. You go back one slide, and President Engstrom, I think about 3 years ago, asked me this question. I didn't answer it very good. And then he asked Bill this question, and he didn't answer it very good. So I started thinking about this. How in the world could we be ranked really well in terms of completions per the number of students we have enrolled, yet we have lower than average graduation rates? And the answer is in the details, of course. And the primary factor here is that completions per head count take into consideration all students. They count every student the same, whether you're a full-time or a part-time student. And it turns out we don't have very many part-time students. In fact, we're 50th in the nation in terms of the percent of part-time students that we have. Other states have a whole bunch of part-time students. So what happens is they move down the scale. We basically are staying the same when we compare the total number of completions relative to our head count. So we're concerned with head count when it comes to borrowing. Anybody can borrow. Part-time student can borrow. Full-time student can borrow. So the accurate way of taking a look at this is the relationship between your head count and those students that are completing. So the other explanation is that first-time, full-time students are those that make up the graduation rate cohorts. This is not worth spending this much time on, but it's just something I needed to get by so we could continue on with the presentation.
All right. Then another factor we thought about in terms of the denominator is the mix of what you think would be a lower cost degree, lower cost credential, and what is that mix for Montana compared to the rest of the state. In other words, out of the total number of credentials that we produce, how many of them are certificates versus associate degrees versus bachelor's degrees compared to the rest of the states. And you can see that, well, lo and behold, here we are again. So in fact, only 29% of the, let's see if I can say this right, 44% is the national average in terms of certificates as a part of the undergraduate credentials that are produced. And in Montana, we're at 29%. So we do have a much lower part of our enrollment mix. That, and again, we keep saying this in every different way you can think of, but we know that what this means is that we're not using the two-year system as an entry point as heavily as other states do. Okay, so let's come back to the original question. Why is it that we look so alarmingly high on that array in terms? And again, what was the measure that we were looking at? We were looking at the number of dollars borrowed in total by our students compared to the number of credentials that they earn. And we were comparing the state of Montana to the rest of the United States, and we saw that we were fifth in the nation. That's not where we want to be. So, what's causing that? Well, certainly it's true that Montana University graduates are borrowing more than the national average. Individual students, the amount that they borrow is higher. It's also true that a higher percentage of Montana University system graduates are borrowing. That's a statistically significant difference there between the 63% and the 55%. Okay, we also wanted to make sure that the issue wasn't in terms of our ability to have our students succeed in completing their credential. Well, it turns out, no, we're doing fine there. Montana ranks high compared to the rest of the nation with regard to completions per 100 enrolled. We do know that we have an issue, and again, this is something we revisit in many, many conversations. We know that we are not utilizing the two-year sector to the degree that other states are. So really, what we're talking about here is a combination of all of the above. And the question you have to ask is, what do we do about that? We're not ready to really say what the strategies are going to be. We'll be coming back with some recommendations, but I just want to kind of bring this all together for just a second. Let's compare the two-year and the four-year sectors. And again, let's look at just a few years ago to now. And what we know is that in 2002-2003, 62% of the entering students in the two-year sector were borrowing, and compared to 57% in the four-year. So again, we actually have, for the lower cost part of our delivery, a higher percentage of students are borrowing. But more than that, you can see that they not only started out higher, their growth has been greater. They've grown by 3 basis points over that period of time compared to 2 basis points in the four-year sector. The average loan amount, we see similar things. We see that the amount borrowed per academic year for an entering student in an entering cohort a few years ago was $3,700 in the two-year sector. It's now up to $5,893. That's a growth of 58% in about 8 years. An increase of about $2,100. And remember, that's a single year of borrowing. And if you look at the four-year sector, you see similar kinds of trends, although actually even more alarming in the growth rate. You can see that we've gone from $3,994 to $7,127, a growth of 78%, or $3,100. If we look at the average loan, even without the Parents Plus loans, you can see similar kinds of growth. And in fact, what you see there, again, is that the two-year sector is even higher. Okay? But to remind you, if we're trying to manage this, if this is an important measure of our efficiency and effectiveness as a system, and we're trying to manage it using tuition, we may be measuring the wrong variable, or it may not be a sufficient variable. It's necessary but not sufficient. Okay? Because as you look, the loan amounts have grown at twice the rate that the tuition has. So we've had our eye on the ball in terms of the tuition. We've done a good job there. But we really are going to have to look at some of these other factors as well. And certainly part of it is in the price of attendance, but even when you look at the total price of attendance, when you factor in room and board and books and supplies, you can still see that the loan amounts are growing much, much faster than the price. Now, this is we just threw this in as kind of an example of some of the other analysis that we're doing, and this is some analysis we're doing on the Missoula campus right now, where we're trying to essentially get a better handle on how students are actually paying for the price of their attendance. So if you look at this, you can see, all right, we're familiar with the cost side of it, right? We've looked at this a number of times in ways. We know that what it costs a student to attend one of our campuses in the Montana University system is the combination of tuition and fees, as well as room and board, as well as books and supplies, right? And when we talk about the sort of total cost of attendance, the way that the financial aid officers prepare it on behalf of the students for their financial aid package, they will also throw in there other expenses that a student, lifestyle kinds of things that a student would incur. But these are the parts that we have any ability to control right here, and these are the parts where those dollars flow in one manner or another back to the university. All right, now let's see how are those costs being paid for. Well, it turns out, and here we're talking about the average for COT students in Missoula who receive any financial aid whatsoever. All right, so if we average those folks, you see how they're paying. Well, it turns out that on average, those students are receiving $3,129 in Pell Grants. About $34, remember that number, because frankly, that's a big part of the problem. That number needs to be more significant. $34 in state grant aid, $490 in scholarships, $112 in fee waivers, and look at this number, $5,566 in loans, on average $37 in work study. There's something to look at. What can we do to improve that? And then other family contributions, $1,811. So it turns out that if you say, all right, what is the family actually writing a check for outside of what they receive in financial aid and what they borrow, it's about $1,800. Okay? Now, let's go to the next slide, because this is, to me, even more. That's a year. But this is even more dramatic, and I think that this really tells us what part of the issue is. If you look at just those students who receive Pell Grants, any Pell-eligible student, now let's see what that does to the numbers. Well, it turns out that if you're eligible for a Pell Grant, and we just look at just those students, on average, those students are receiving $4,675 in Pell Grant. Another $42 in state grant aid, $582 in scholarships, $141 in fee waivers, and guess what? They're borrowing more than the folks who were not, when we included those that were not eligible for Pell. $6,084, $39 in work study, and see the negative number? So it turns out that for this group of students, after you consider all of the financial aid and the amount that they're borrowing, they actually are putting in a negative number in terms of contribution. In other words, they're borrowing more than it's costing them to go to school. Okay?
Mr. Chairman, I know you're trying to wrap this up, and so I just want to make a couple quick comments. We asked this originally tuition subcommittee to start getting us launched after that conversation many of us had after the May meeting on tuition. And I know, Tyler, you'll mention that it'll like to expand with the guidance of Chairman Buchanan and Chairman Christian in terms of including others, students, et cetera. Lots to work with here, but let me just I told you all that Monday night or Tuesday night, I was with the Montana College Access Network. Someone described to me a student, Pell Grant eligible, who they said it was a niece, it was a family member, they knew their financial situation, and they borrowed enough because they could. They felt the cost of attendance at that particular college or university was too high. That may be, members of the board, one of the levers we have. We've struggled a little bit watching the different cost of attendance estimates, because this uncle said that cost of attendance was too high, and she called her parents and said, I'm borrowing more because I can now go to Mexico for spring break. Now, I know it's just an anecdote, but we all know lots of those anecdotes. They borrow more because they can, and they're not really thinking of the amortization. So I guess one of the things the Affordability Task Force needs to include students and that financial literacy piece. I just want to throw that in there, because maybe in some of our units, we are allowing the cost of attendance figure to be too high and the borrowing potential then to be too high. Is that not correct? Is that not a fair conclusion?
It is. In fact, one of the things that we noted is the place where you start seeing the spike is when the public policy change took place that allowed students to borrow.
Yeah, members of the board, I just think this task force needs to come back to us with some recommendations of how we pull our levers to help bring that down.
Thanks, Commissioner Stearns. Bill, Tyler, thank you very much. Not the easiest news to swallow, but very, very important that we're seeing it. And I echo Sheila's comments. Please include students on that committee. They expressed a direct interest at lunch and before in that. And what I think, as we talk about financial literacy, I said on the 529 Advisory Committee, and one of the things we've been wondering is how do we get a venue or an opportunity to talk about those opportunities, and this fits right in there. Preparedness, not only for students that are 18 and 19 walking in the doors, but starting this conversation with parents and college-bound students when they're much younger, so preparedness can go up. Thank you so much, you guys, for your work on that. We'll look forward to the second step in January, which is policy review and momentum moving forward there. Deputy Commissioner Moore, item E, we're going to rip through a couple of these to leave a little bit of time for the PhD discussion.
Okay, state authorization update. This is the program integrity ongoing saga with the Department of Education. Tom Gibson is managing that for our office. You'll see we've denied 6. They've been pretty unhappy with us, but we haven't been sued yet, so that's the good news with our lawyers. Tom has got over 1,000 emails logged at this point, and it just keeps going. So the dirty details are there for people who want to look, and Tom's available if you want to catch him with any questions.
Deputy Commissioner Moore, thank you. Item F, another information item. If you're not already signed up for the October 11th, 2011 prioritization alignment of programs summit in Missoula, encourage you to consider that. Student Regent Teal, the author of this book, is going to be joining us that day. There's some homework for you prior to the meeting.
You could get an autographed copy.
Yeah, right. All of us should read Robert Dickinson's book prior to that.
And the agenda is up on the screen.
And the
so.
agenda is up on the screen, right? Available on the agenda item to this meeting. So please review it. If you're on the fence, it's going to be, we're pretty excited about that. Sylvia, item G.
Internationally offered programs is kind of linked with level 1. As we were getting some approved, I thought it'd be a good time to do a summary, and I thank the 2 research institutions for doing that summary for us. You have that information. It is fascinating to me to see how global we are here in the state of Montana, and kudos to our campuses.
We'll come back to item H in a moment. Dr. Moore, how about item I?
Accreditation report is simply an obligation for us to report to the board. The 8 campuses that are in that new pathway and had to do their reports earlier in the year all got the documents back that they're on track. Remember that it is a 7-year process and then you start over, but they've all done the first step and that all looks good, so thank you to those 8 campuses.
That's great. One more item that's not on the agenda. We want to cram in this so we can get some discussion with Dean Blackketter and Montana Tech, but we as a board have been talking a lot about getting prepared for the 2013 legislature. We walked away a little confused, to say the least, at the last one. But one thing we're all determined is to be very much on the offensive. A few sessions ago, we had a transferability project, which was a joint project with the legislature. They helped us fund it. The governor's office helped. We've made some great progress, and we're real close to the finish line. We need to get that completed. We are bragging very appropriately so about a lot of the work that's getting finished, but we're not quite there. And so all of you in this room, please take the message back that we need to have that completed so that when we posture ourselves for the 2013 legislature, we've done our work and completed the tasks that we've promised to complete. Just a quick note on that, and thanks for the work that's been done regarding the transferability project, but let's get her finished. The momentum's too strong. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I know we're running behind, but certainly believe this is a very important discussion, and it's the last on our agenda. I think we'll be inviting Chancellor Blackketter to the table here for a discussion on developing PhD programs at Montana Tech of U of M, or I'll actually pass it to President Engstrom for the start of this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman Buchanan, members of the board. I'll just make a quick opening comment here. It's no secret that faculty and staff and administration at Montana Tech have had interest in doctoral level education for a number of years. The community of Butte has expressed a good deal of interest in doctoral education. We recognize that this is an extremely complex issue and one that will take much discussion before we arrive at any kind of an answer. I don't know what the outcome of that discussion will be, but I do know that we shouldn't be afraid to ask ourselves the question, and that's what we've asked Chancellor Blackketter to do, is begin asking ourselves the question, should Montana Tech be involved in doctoral education? So with that, I'll turn it over to Chancellor Blackketter.
Thank you, President Engstrom, Chair Buchanan, members of the board. We have the questions that we have posed on the screen up there, and I'll just briefly introduce those questions and then entertain discussion. I stepped into the position of Montana Tech about 2.5 months ago, and so definitely in the middle of the conversation, and I do appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion. Programs, why are these programs important to Montana Tech? And I can quickly go through a few of them. Concern over our ability to attract high-quality faculty, students, and staff. Certainly the PhD program is something that is attractive for faculty. We are not eligible for certain research funding opportunities that are available only to doctoral granting institutions. We do about $9 million a year in extramural research work on the Montana Tech campus. That would provide additional opportunities. It would help us to continue and enhance our campus research infrastructure and support the state and local community and local industry as a primary provider of technical education for the responsible use of our natural resources. In terms of the MUS strategic plan, there's a number of objectives in the strategic plan that this ties into. Increasing research and development receipts and expenditures is certainly one aspect of that. Increase the number and percentage of graduate students in the Montana University system is another, and increase graduate degree production, maintaining a strong concentration in science, technology, energy, and math are areas that would support. In the Silver Bow area, there are local businesses such as CCAST and Resodyne and MSE who are doing work in this area and are very supportive of some of the really programs of distinction, which leads me into the third point here that we have at Montana Tech. We have the state's only petroleum engineering. We have a strong metallurgy, especially in extractive metallurgical programs. There are just a very few of those in the country. Our geophysics, our geological engineering, our mining engineering are all programs that have baccalaureate and master's degree that are providing many engineers and people for the Montana industries at very high-paying level jobs. They are definitely in demand. Just a little bit of a side note. The U.S. News ranked Montana Tech as #1 top public regional college in the West and #6 in the United States. So it really plays into the strength that we have, not only in our engineering programs, but in our science, our chemistry, our nursing programs, our business programs. You don't just get recognized for one aspect to get the #1 top public regional college in the West. But our materials and metallurgical department has partnered with the University of Montana, Missoula. with research in an individualized interdisciplinary doctoral program. They have partnered with Missoula and Bozeman in the development of a joint PhD program in material science, which is still going through the system. This last year, Montana Tech hosted an MSU Bozeman PhD candidate in electrical engineering, one of, I think, 6 PhD graduates from Montana State that was a member of Montana Tech, was a chair of the Students' Dissertation Committee, and provided research support and space for the students' research project. Number 4 and 5, I think, are the ones that are really interesting to me. You know, when you think about, you know, and I know there are concerns about duplication of programs, collaboration, trying to develop an MUS system. You know, our ability to leverage our faculty statewide is really important. And there are a lot of faculties within our state of Montana that could use each other in terms of being able to provide comprehensive graduate programs on a statewide basis. Certainly in the last 5 years, it's sort of been a rumor for a long time that you could do easy distant education and connectivity between campuses. That really is real now, and it is moderately inexpensive, if not free. The system I came from used that all the time, and our ability in Idaho was really was successful based upon our ability to collaborate with faculty around the state at multiple locations, and it increased the productivity of the graduate programs significantly by being able to use relatively modest faculties of programs in a collaborative way across the state. And I think that we have some of those opportunities that we're certainly taking advantage of here in Montana, but our ability to leverage faculty in a statewide mission is certainly something that I would encourage us to work on. And our ability to increase research statewide with programs that can work together and to be able to use expensive equipment. And in particular, we have the CAMP, the Center for Advanced Minerals and Metallurgical Processes on our campus that has a lot of equipment that we can use. And so our ability to collaborate will be key to our efficient use of the resources around the state. Additional resources, number 5, the governor had set aside $600,000 in this biennium for helping support at least exploration of PhD programs. We have a number, there's chicken and egg thing going on here. We have a number of industries, partners that are excited about doctoral programs at Montana Tech and are willing to provide significant resources. It's sort of, what do you do first? Do you get the resources first? I think there needs to be some movement on that so that we can firm up some of those commitments, or at least possible commitments. And even in terms of on our Montana Tech campus itself, looking at our curriculums, looking at our undergraduate programs, our graduate programs, working with Montana State on making sure that we are not duplicating graduate level courses, which in engineering typically have relatively modest enrollments, is something that is important when we look at creating programs such as this. And I'm going to stop right there and see if there's some discussion on it. Thank you, Chair Buchanan.
Thank you much, Chancellor Blackketter. Any thoughts, questions? Regent Barrett.
Well, if I follow what you're saying, I mean, the logic of, I mean, I agree with you. Items 4 and 5 are kind of the drivers here. The other ones are more external. It's good for this and it's good for that, but they're not you. You know, they're the outside things. But if I heard what you said, and I was interested because when I heard that, I thought that's interesting. I thought I really almost heard you saying that the best way to do this would be with collaborative programs rather than standalone programs. I mean, that was kind of what you were saying, but that's not what I thought you were going to say. I thought you were going to be, I mean, it sounded to me like you were saying you can achieve your objective by, as you are on the particular one you have right now with selecting some others, or working with MSU and creating this PhD, the availability of programs without having to grow it on your own, and that was a wise approach.
I think the answer, Regent Barrett, is yes. Let me drill down into that and be very specific. Our ability to grant a diploma from Montana Tech is something that is important to us. On the other hand, when I look at our resources around the state, say in engineering, our engineering faculty, or even some of the other faculties that are around the state, I think that our ability to use those faculties in a collaborative manner are essential to the successful programs, not only at Montana Tech or at Missoula and at Bozeman, but at each of those institutions for productivity. So I think the answer is yes, and I drilled right down into maybe what was the...
Okay, well, I want to be sure I understand. Remind me again the program that you now have a PhD working with Missoula.
We have an interdisciplinary doctoral program that we have had some collaboration. Maybe President Engstrom can address that.
Well, I'm not concerned, I just wanted to, I'm not concerned about the details.
And we are looking for a material science program between Tech, University of Montana, Missoula, and MSU Bozeman.
Okay, well, let's just take those two for example. We just using those two as an example, if a student, if you put you have one put together, you're looking to put another one together, when the student is graduate, gets the PhD, who's awarding it?
That's right.
That's I'm asking you. As it's currently modeled, it would be either UM or MSU, is that correct? Or who?
It is yet to be decided. On the interdisciplinary study, it is the University of Montana, Missoula.
Okay. Well, assuming that's the case, and let's just assume for discussion purposes it's the case with the materials testing, what value are you missing then for Butte?
Well, we miss the opportunity as a non-doctoral granting institution to be able to apply for certain federal research programs. That's one. I would turn it, what difference would it make to cost or efficiency if you had Montana Tech offer to provide the diploma? So if you were doing all the work, you're providing the courses, you were sharing the courses, you're doing collaborative, you know, there is benefit to us on being able to apply for research funding that are available to doctoral institutions. I don't see any disadvantage to having the doctoral degree granted by Montana Tech.
Well, it's not the label. I may not be able to express this well because I don't know the academic rules well enough. But when you start having your own programs and your own advisor, you've altered the structure of your faculty. The people who are doing PhD advising now are not teaching us. But as you're going to change your whole faculty to do this, you're going to need more bodies to do the things you're doing now when you do those, because you've altered that structure, and there's a dollar cost associated with that.
Yes, there is to some extent.
You haven't necessarily done that.
Well, we are doing it to some extent now with, for example, the electrical engineering student that just finished in the spring. So we already have we've reallocated, if you will, internally our time to be able to allow that faculty member to guide that PhD student. So in some ways, we already are doing some of that reallocation internally. Increased grant funding is one way. You have PhD programs will stimulate increased research funding, and so you use that money to support your students. And then we have, there is a high demand. We are having trouble, frankly, hiring many of those natural resource faculty members. We can't compete with industry. There is a need, and it may be older, if you will, or more experienced people in the industry that will come back and get their academic credentials and go into those fields. So there is some cost associated with it, but there's also this interest with the industry community to fund it, to help fund it with endowed chairs. Money from the state has already been put, it's one-time only money, I understand that, but our ability to attract that funding from industry, which Montana Tech has been very successful, supported very heavily by industry. In fact, over a high proportion of our foundation money comes in through industry. And so those people are interested in providing, just like whoever mentioned the older group that was falling off the end of the workforce, that's what we're worried about as well in this industry.
Yeah. Well, see, to me, it's kind of a math question. That is, when it's all done, federal funding, all the different sources, do we have to slice the pie thinner to make that work, or will those outside sources carry it? I mean, that'll be the question. Because if there's not a question if it's a good idea, it's a question of how we pay for it.
I would say the answer is substantially. That's the intent, and that would be what happens substantially. I think we would each be naive to think that there were no resources, even if they were internal reallocations of resources, that we have to do on program adjustment, curriculum adjustments, reallocation of faculty time, using our endowments that we have for faculty increments differently. And if that's included in it, then it's less. If that's included in it, it's more substantial. But I agree, but I would not stand here and tell you that there is no cost associated with it 100%. I think that would be an honest answer to you. They are in areas that return greater tax revenue upon completion and going to work. So that might be an encouragement to the state.
We would hope it would encourage the legislature, but somehow that connection is not always made.
May not.
I think some of it is maybe expanding question one. When you're working your way through these things, I don't doubt that it's good for Montana Tech. I think that's going to be a pretty easy question for you to answer. I think the broader question I wonder is, how does it fit in terms of our overall system? And what does it do to the overall resource pool that we have? And duplication is a topic that doesn't bother me as much as some. I don't really think of it in that terms. I just think of it in the overall as how does it affect the system? What's the best thing for the system? And what will it do to, I think to use Steve's word, does it dilute the resources of other institutions to do that, or how will those intertwine? Collaboration may be the answer to some of that, but I think more important to me than will it be good for Montana Tech, because I think it would be, but is sort of back to that, will it be good for the system? Is that the best use of our resources? And that has to sort of be applied system-wide.
And that's a good point. I will make one thing. I don't want to, you're a graduate, Regent Teal, you're a graduate student in chemical engineering? An undergrad. So I hate to burst your bubbles early in that process, but the graduate degree that you will get, I'm sure, beyond that undergraduate degree is becoming a real norm, especially in the science and engineering fields, and you may be already planning to go to graduate school. So I would point out that as you look to the two-year programs and increasing enrollment, we're also going to have to understand that the norm in some of our STEM disciplines in particular, but even all disciplines, that graduate degree at the master level or the PhD level are going to become norms for those that will at least be the leaders of industry and academics in the future. And that's, for Montana, that's good, I think, to recognize that and work towards that. And it's in the strategic plan.
Yeah, well, and the flip side of that argument, I mean, the opposite of what I was just saying would be if that is indeed important, and we make the policy judgment that increasing doctorals in the STEM disciplines and there is important to the state and the system, then, and the pie isn't getting any bigger, it would then mean we have to look at either that institution or other institutions and say they're going to do less so you can do more, and we have to make a value judgment. We have a finite resource, always. So we'd have to make a value judgment, which is the greater good. I don't know the answer.
And I agree with that in some sense, but also efficiency adjustments. If you have, our ability to say have a five-person class in, advanced fluid mechanics or advanced metallurgy course at each institution is not, that's an efficient use if you can offer that at both places. Where you have one instructor and you have good connectivity between the institutions and collaborative efforts between them. It's not like a class that has 60 students and you're trying to do that. Our graduate degrees and our science programs in many cases are modest in numbers. They're important. I don't want to go tell you that we're not productive by any stretch, but there is capacity in that system in areas that are appropriate that allow collaboration for what I would call minimal kinds of cost. And so I don't think it's 100% slice the pie thinner.
Mr. Chairman, I'd probably be remiss if I didn't comment on this, considering Governor Schweitzer has skin in the game in the form of $600,000 in OTO appropriations we sought to pursue this, to investigate it. I think the conversation we've had so far, the connection that we're not necessarily making is, for the last year and a half, 2 years, we've been talking about how can we define what these campuses do, what they do well, and how we can promote those programs that are known that are the excellent programs on these campuses. Where else are we going to have a petroleum engineering program other than Montana Tech, mining, metallurgy? Those sorts of pieces all blend together very well at Montana Tech. So you look at where is the revenue coming from? Well, it's coming from, at least from the state perspective, a lot of it's coming from natural resource development. We've never produced more oil, we've never produced more coal, and those companies are approaching us saying, we need you to partner with us to do more workforce training. Now, for those of you that know my boss, or for those of you that know who I work for, you know that the first thing he says back to them is, okay, how much are you going to write the check for so we can get these things going? But I guess what we would encourage you, what the governor's office would encourage you to look at as you begin analyzing these programs and what would be an offering, what would not, is one, where are the jobs coming? Two, what pieces of the STEM discipline do we want to expand on in the state? I think we've all made a commitment, both as a state and as a nation, to enhance our STEM capabilities. As we heard at breakfast this morning, even Brazil now has 90,000 students at their Sao Paulo University. So we need to pursue this. We need to analyze it. We need to make sure it pays for itself in one way or another. Is that going to be some state commitment? Is that going to be some reallocation of inefficient program costs over to this doctoral program? We need to make sure that we minimize duplicative programs to the extent we can. But certainly when you look at $8 million record-breaking oil and gas leases just this week, the need is there, and this is an opportunity for the university system to step up and match it. So.
Thanks, Mr. Villa. Regent McLean. And I think after this comment, we're just discussing, we're grossly behind schedule, but I think a commitment we could make is between this meeting and our next meeting is for this committee to host kind of a continuation of this dialogue, because clearly we've got some opinions and some things to uncover. But Regent McLean, wrap it up.
I'll just make this quick and thank Dr. Blackheader and Dr. Engstrom for bringing this forward. This has clearly, I think, been on the minds and in the hearts of Butte residents, alumni of Montana Tech, and industry officials who look to Montana Tech to fill its employment ranks. And I think they're looking to Montana Tech to address these adjusting norms that Dr. Blackheader just discussed with us. And we have, I think, a great opportunity as a board to take these questions and get our hands around all of the answers. And I look forward to being a part of that discussion, Regent Buchanan, as the dialogue moves forward. Thank you.
Chancellor Blackheader, any final thoughts?
Thank you for the opportunity, Chairman Buchanan.
Can't tell you how much we appreciate you fostering a dialogue of energy there. That was great. With that, I apologize about our tardiness and completion. And as a member of the next committee, I promise to keep my mouth shut to see if we can hurry it up. Thanks, Chairman Barrett.
We didn't do the level 2 items.
Oh, I'm sorry. Good catch. Deputy Commissioner Moore, level 2 items.
Knowing my readers, they're up there for reading, and any comment or suggestions back to the campuses, those will be for action at the next meeting.
Well, I mean, I'd like to comment, because I think it's not fair to complain that, well, we can't complain really at the next meeting theoretically. We can, but I guess I have a question, and possibly Provost Potvin could answer him, but I have a question about that religious studies major being proposed at MSU. And it's just apropos of all these discussions. I don't know that there would be, and Provost Potvin can answer it, I suspect there's not a significant cost associated with creating a major. Probably it's put together from existing classes. But I have to ask, why do we do it? We keep creating more and more little things. At some point in time, there's cost, and at some point in time, there's, I don't even know how to express it, but the more and more wheels and more moving parts we get, the more complex and more costly it is. I noted in the write-up, it said, I think it said some students might not attend MSU because there's not a religious studies program. I suspect that's not even anecdotal. I suspect that's just speculation, that we actually don't have someone who said, I won't go there. Even if we did, there probably are people that won't attend because we don't have, a number of other programs. Somehow this seems like a stretch to value, and I'd like to hear why it's not.
Madam Provost.
Commissioner Stearns, is on?
Yep.
Yeah. Chair Christian, Regent Barrett. We currently have a religious studies minor, and we currently have academic options in both history and in philosophy, so bachelor program options. Courses also in religious studies are taken by about 400 students a year as general education courses. So the goal here is to prepare students for graduate school, for law school in ways that we have not done by offering the particular degree. Given that these students can get academic, theoretical, and practical experience based and have a working knowledge of religious studies is something that we'd like to expand on and just take these programs to a different level, given that there is some student interest. Now, the cost will be in potentially adding another course, and when these programs come across my desk, the question is, what course are you not going to offer so that you can offer these courses? So these programs have been well thought out in terms of resources in supporting these programs, and then 7 years down the road, when the board needs their program reviews done on these programs, we can look and see what the attendance is in these programs and the number of students that are in these programs, and we question low enrollment programs. I would say, as both U of M and MSU look at providing increased internationalization components in our curriculum, as we think about sending our students out into global society, many, many cultures are based in religion. Many, many wars are fought based on religion. Having our students have an understanding of the different cultural and religious aspects, I think, is an important component of humanities and social science instruction. So that's the basis for this program.
Well, I don't question that there's always value in educating, in learning something. So that the fact that there's a value to it it's how the value fits in. I mean, you're starting with by your own definition, a very low enrollment program to begin with. If we question low enrollment programs, why do we create low enrollment programs? Question: is there a religious studies program at UM?
Regent Barrett, we have a religious studies program. It's an would you answer
option
that?
as well.
It's an option.
We actually have an option in our liberal studies.
So we have students completing a religious studies option in history, and we have students completing a religious studies option in philosophy. And this just elevates that to a degree.
Thank you.
Just a comment to your question that you said I should pass along. The Religious Studies Department at the University of Montana was closed in the budget cutbacks of 1989. Says the voice of history, the oldest person in the room.
Chairman Barrett, anything further there? Thanks for your questions. Thank you very much, Madam Provost. All right, with that, we yield the committee to you, Chairman Barrett. Pardon me, is there any public comment on any items on this agenda? Any public comment? John, please.
Hi, I'm John Newmeyer from Montana State University and chairman of our Academic Affairs Committee, and we reviewed this program proposal. And I just wanted to share some numbers with you because I myself was a little bit puzzled at the potential need for religious studies. So I called around in neighboring states, and I found that at North Dakota State, they have a minor in religious studies with 50 to 60 majors, 10 to 12 graduate a year. At the University of North Dakota, this was a good example because they went under review last year. They offered 188 classes in 7 years, attended by 5,564 students. So you can see the interest in religious studies is really quite strong. They have 30 majors, 3 faculty, and 1 adjunct. Idaho State at Pocatello has no religious studies major, just as an example of a regional university that does not have one. Wyoming started a religious studies major 1 year ago, and a minor they started in 93. They have 20 majors at the moment, and they recently graduated 1. Their intro class, covering 6 religions, has 250 students. 50 in addition are online, taking the course online. Each semester, Wyoming offers 10 to 15 classes, serving 400 to 600 undergraduate students. They have 5 full-time faculty. And Martha gave you the numbers for MSU. So this at least gives you an idea. I think there's quite an interest in religious studies for numerous reasons, across the world. And I think a lot of that, of course, has to do with a lot of the political situations at the moment. For example, what's been going on in Muslim countries in the last year is really dramatic. So there's great student interest in this at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Niemeyer. Any other public comment? Chairman Christian, gavel's yours.
All right. I think we will take a 5-minute break, and we literally just need to hold it to that because we are significantly behind on the schedule. And then we're going to do the panel that is in the 2-year committee. We have some people here to participate on that panel that are just here for today. And if we will run over and probably move the balance of the 2-year committee to tomorrow morning so we can do our executive session on time. Let's take a 5-minute break and we'll be back here to wrap up the panel. That's okay. All right, we'll call this meeting back to order, and Chairman Barrett, we'll start our 2-year.
I will urge, we want to give, full attention to everything we have to do, but as we go through our agenda, let's, I guess, pick and choose. The first one is important. They're all important, but this is a big one, given we just had a number of people attend the Lumina conference. So I'll ask John Seck, he's around here somewhere, I don't know. Where? There he is. I was looking out there. To introduce the Lumina panel and the discussion that we're going to have.
Thank you, Chairman Barrett. We were very fortunate in Montana. The Lumina Foundation provided funding and permission for 15 people from Montana, in addition to myself, to attend Lumina's National Productivity Conference in Indianapolis back in August. Those members included Mick Robinson, Deputy Commissioner, Commissioner Stearns, Brandy Foster from the Commissioner's Office, Sue Jones from the Commissioner's Office, Martha Potvin, Provost of MSU, Steve York, Assistant Superintendent of Public Instruction, Regent Robinson, Senator Hawks, Senator Lake, Pat Wise from the Governor's Office, Bob Nystuen, Chair of the Board of Trustees at Flathead Valley Community College, Susan Stanton, a member of the Board of Trustees of Miles Community College, Annie Glover from Strategies 360, Ann Clark, our Lumina evaluator, and Judy Hyman, our Lumina Montana liaison. The conference included some amazing speakers of national and international quality, and one of those speakers, Mr. Andy Goodman, we will actually be bringing to Montana on December 15th and 16th for a summit that we will be holding on rebranding and renaming the colleges of technology, and I'll be speaking more about that summit tomorrow during the second half of our 2-year report. The conference centered around Lumina's goals, And Lumina's goals are centered around 4 key areas: performance funding, student incentives, new models, business efficiencies, all of which tie into our College Now initiative, which is funded through Lumina. A major aspect of this conference was the ability for our state teams to spend a lot of time together and work on our own initiative and plan. So today we will hear from Commissioner Stearns, Regent Robinson, Brandy Foster, Director of American Indian Minority Achievement, Steve York, the Assistant Superintendent of the Office of Public Instruction, and they will share with you their felt impact from the conference and what their key takeaways were. So at this point, I'd like to begin with Regent Robinson, and then we'll go through the list.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. What I wanted to focus on, more my couple takeaways from this, really focused on the theme of communication, it seemed like. I wanted to attend to really understand not only what we were doing from the perspective of Montana for College Now, but how it fit into the bigger scheme of things and how we kind of compared with what was being done on a national level. The 2 areas that I'd like to talk about that relate to communications. One of them is what John had mentioned regarding Andy Goodman. Andy Goodman was one of the presenters there, and he's with the Goodman Center. He works with organizations to help them be more effective in communicating what it is that they do and how they can those organizations help them to retain, help them to expand their programs, help them to fundraise. And the takeaway that I had from his session, which was practical skills, which was really nice to see, he talked about storytelling. It seems like a simple thing, but in the way that he presented it, first of all, storytelling needs to be done and it needs to have a face. It needs to have something that inspires people to want to pay attention to what's going on. And it was really kind of interesting because that's about where we're at with this process of College Now. There's been a lot of good work done, a great strategy that's been put together, a lot of buy-in, but what we have to do now at this point is tell that story compellingly. Part of that is the work that we'll be starting with Strategies 360. It actually has started already, and I'm sure you'll go over this a little bit later, but it's important on all different levels, not only just through PowerPoint presentations, but all levels of communication, of tell that story and be consistent about that story. So I think if Mr. Goodman is going to be able to come out, I think it would be very helpful with a lot of us, including what's happening with College Now. Now, the second thing that I wanted to speak about was in regard to what was termed authentic engagement, and that it's so important if we're really bringing on stakeholders and we're really including those stakeholders in this discussion, that truly be an authentic engagement, meaning that there is not only a strategy, but there's a place for them to participate and a means for them to participate. And by that I mean some of the stakeholders, obviously we've had all of the 2-year campuses, the colleges participating in this effort. But in addition to that, as we've heard today too, with student participation, that's critical because that's exactly what we're trying to all work towards, is creating a better system that works for the student. Having that student participation, having those, even though they're not a part of the system, they are certainly affected by and bring value to our higher education system, and again, that's the tribal colleges. Having them as true partners, and how do you engage them by actually putting it in the strategic plan and making an action related to that. So those are a couple things that I took away from this. Just in general, though, I felt like it was a really good opportunity to talk with other practitioners about what's going on in their particular state. It was really encouraging to see how many good things state of Montana is already doing. But again, I think sometimes where we miss the target a little bit is telling that story and getting it out there to that audience so that they understand this is what's going on. So with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Regent Robinson. We'll work our way through the entire panel and then open it up for questions. So at this point, I'd like to call on Assistant Superintendent Steve York for his comments.
First of all, Dr. Seck, Commissioner Stearns, appreciate the opportunity for the Office of Public Instruction to have a seat at this table with the College Now process. It's essential that we be there. We are giving you the product that you are working with, and there's much that we can learn, and maybe some things that we can do that are helpful in making sure that these strategies work and that the goals are met. As far as takeaways in the conference, I'm kind of the little bit the new kid on the block, having jumped into this just within the last month or so. But I think the most important thing that I walked away with is how we need to focus on transitions. I heard a presentation earlier about orientation and ways to do orientation. It is helpful in retaining students. Transitions in my career in education have always been where we have our biggest stumbling blocks. We need to make sure that kids come out of high school, move into the post-secondary area, and that they feel like they belong. They feel like they're connected. I think this was said over and over, that the days of recruitment are past. It's now recruitment and retention. We've got to keep a hold of these kids once they get there. One session I sat in on, presented by a group of educators from Maryland, talked about course redesign. And this is a voluntary program in Maryland where professors can work with specialists to redesign their course so that it is better designed to meet the learner of today. It reduces the amount of students that are not passing courses, and it all moves students along at a faster pace. With that, there's also a push within Maryland to try to reduce the numbers of students that people are seeing in larger entry-level classes where you may have 400 or 500. They're using graduate assistants to try to break those numbers down so that students can actually make a good connection with professors in their first few years of school. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we have projects going right now in conjunction with OSHE, with the Office of Commissioner Higher Ed, and the colleges around the area, Big Sky Pathways and Adult Basic Education. Those are the types of things that I think we can do in conjunction that will improve transitions. I'm going to, Dr. Seck, I'm going to come back to my second point because it kind of follows something that Brandy is going to be speaking about. So with that, I'll turn over the mic.
Thanks, Steve. I'm Brandy Foster. I'm the new Director of American Indian and Minority Achievement for the Commissioner's Office. And before that, I was the Chief Academic Officer at the University of Montana College of Technology in Helena. And so I think I was asked to go and sort of review the information through those two lenses. And the two things that I wanted to make sure are at the table to inform our discussion, specifically on performance-based funding. One is on mission differentiation, and they really spoke to the importance of allowing the campuses to remain unique to their mission and to the regions that they serve through performance-based funding. For example, in Pennsylvania, they have 4 or 5 measures that they use consistently for every campus. And then they have a menu of about 10 measures that they allow the individual campuses to select so that they can determine what is important to them. And the last part, which I think is the most important, is the campuses then take outcomes from their strategic plans and use that as part of the performance measure. And I think that that allows campuses to remain true to who they are and to focus on the priorities. And so I would ask that that be at the table while we have these discussions. And the second one is I want to remind us all that as we look at performance-based funding and look at the outcomes and the data, that there are students behind those numbers. And it's particularly important to remember our commitment as a university system to those students who have historically been underserved in our state in higher education. And so whether that means being flexible in the way we're looking at those measures or how we're applying them, I just want to remind all of us that, you know, we have students that enter our system who have had challenges historically, and that we have said we have a commitment to serve those students. So I'd just like to remind all of us to keep them in mind as we're having those discussions.
Steve?
I didn't want to steal Brandy's thunder because I had something in the area of performance-based funding that I did want to share that was actually quite rewarding to listen to. We have these same challenges in K-12 education. We talk a lot about performance-based funding. We also talk about performance-based pay, merit pay, and those sorts of things. So one of the things that was really unique about Pennsylvania's system is that they have a flat amount of money that stays with the formula-based funding setup. I believe in Pennsylvania it's 97.5% of the state money is allocated to institutions based on a formula, similar to now. They use 2.5% in their performance-based funding. And that 2.5% is distributed to schools that make those 10 points that Brandy's talking about, or a percentage of the 10 points. It also includes the size of their school. That money then is sent to them separately on a yearly basis, and they use it generally for campus enhancement, professional development, things that aren't going to be reoccurring costs. I was always nervous with performance-based, and I know a gentleman from California was very nervous because their system looks like it's going to actually affect their base budgets. I like this concept. It allows the base budgets to stay in place and gives schools incentive to perform highly and maybe get a little extra to work with. So.
Thank you. Now I'd like to call on Commissioner Stearns to provide just a few reflections from her participation in the conference.
Thank you, and I would just wind it up by thanking our colleagues in K-12, Steve, and please convey our thanks to Superintendent Juneau for having you, and before you, Joyce Silverthorne, be involved with College Now. I think all of us, we really thought, did you already say this, that the Montana team was the best team at this conference, and I really mean that. I mean, don't you think? I mean, we were. We had the most energy, we had the most sort of creativity, and I think that one of the things Provost Potvin said, and I got to sit next to her at a lot of our Montana team meetings, is the number of things we were talking about and learning about and generating ideas benefit the entire university system, not just the two-year sector, benefit the entire educational spectrum, potentially, in Montana, not just our two-year colleges. So I really think we're on the right track. I would like to, compliment those who participated. We all know when we've had a chance to go to one of these productivity conferences, you think, oh, productivity, it sounds like you're going to a widget, manufacturing deal of some kind. And they really stress when you're there, by productivity, they really want high quality. They said, this country needs high quality graduates, not just degrees, not just papers, not just diploma mills. So I think that sometimes we don't stress that enough, but any of us who were there heard that emphasis, and we were hearing ways, whether it's module instruction or whatever, to serve our students better, faster, yes, but without compromising quality. And in some cases, as you could see from Tyler's and Bill Muse's data, getting that two-year certificate or credential, it might be in AAS and nursing or something, that you're going to make more than, frankly, some four-year baccalaureate prepared teachers. So yes, you may have borrowed more, but you need to have this College Now momentum that I think we've got and should be proud of. So thank you, and that's if actually Lumina folks may be watching. A couple of them are watching on stream, and I want to say thank you out there in California and Indiana. We really appreciated it.
Thank you, Commissioner Stearns. And yes, indeed, I did receive a report that several folks from the Lumina Foundation are watching this via live stream this afternoon. So thank you for communicating that. Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I guess I want to ask you a schedule question. We're almost at 4:15. I know we have an executive session scheduled and we have some CEO review. And the things we have left are going to take some time, so you think it might be appropriate that we break and continue the 2-year?
If you have a preference, we could break. The other thing we could do is finish your committee and then do the executive session first thing tomorrow morning.
Okay.
Before we start the regular
that would
session.
That would be
Might
fine.
keep us from having to do the transitioning to different rooms and.
Okay.
All right, does that work for everybody? All right, well, we'll just plan on that. I think we've got some time set aside for a picture and some things. I think we could squeeze that down in the morning, still leave us time to do the executive session and try to reconvene the regular session around 10, if not shortly thereafter, as soon as we finish the exec.
Then we'll move on, but now don't let the fact that we have some time make you get real talky. So if anybody has any thoughts or comments relative to the Lumina panel, I mean, there are a number of people here who went, and I've talked in some detail with some. There were a lot of things that went on, so I'd urge you to talk to some people who went and look at the materials, and if you have any more comments, of course, email them or otherwise communicate them to, excuse me, Deputy Commissioner Sack, excuse me. And now, again, I'll turn again to John to talk about the College Now mission.
Thank you, Chairman Barrett. And in interest of time, I will offer up item G as a deferment for November, the update on innovative delivery of curricula. Dean Schaefer and Dean Hayatella, I'm sure, will not mind to defer their report until November, which in November they'll have much more to talk about. So that'll help. Basically, I would like to take just a few minutes to set the stage for what I think are some really exciting developments about what's happening in College Now and how this work that's taking place in College Now is continuing to change the landscape of two-year education in the state of Montana for a really good way, but also for a very important reason. First of all, it relates to the economic competitiveness of our state and, frankly, the nation. And I'll just give you a few statistics. In Montana, using 2008 census data, we have about 38% of our adults between 25 and 64 possess at least a two-year degree. That's up about 4% from the 2000 census. And based on a Lumina report, if you carry that forward to 2025, our degree attainment, associate or higher, will be about 46.5% by 2025. That means we're making progress, but you know it's not enough. The President of the United States has set an educational attainment goal for this country of 60%, so 46.5% won't quite get us there. The United States, as you know, has fallen to 10th place in the nation for educational attainment, and it is possible for Montana to start making headway towards its goal, but it's going to take a lot to get us there. It's going to take reaching out early, as Assistant Superintendent York mentioned, reaching out to the students in high school, helping them to understand their pathways, their opportunities, serving more adults. According to Associate Commissioner Trevor, we have 130,000 adults in Montana with some college but absolutely no credential. We need to reach out to the low income, the first generation, and persons of color. And that relates to our 5 strategies for college now, and particularly to strategy 1, which is extending the comprehensive 2-year mission, which you approved in May, to the 5 colleges of technology. And that comprehensive 2-year mission means that each of the colleges of technology will possess the transfer mission, the workforce development mission, partner with OPI for ABE developmental ed, provide community development and lifelong learning. This summer, the Commissioner appointed a committee focused on extending this comprehensive mission to the 5 colleges of technology, and that is co-chaired by Chancellor Groseth and myself, and also includes the 5 COT deans, Chancellor Blackketter, Provost Brown, the 3 community college presidents, Tom Gibson and Sue Jones. And the goal that we're working on, and what we've been working on, is how we're going to go about, over the next 25 months, extending the comprehensive mission to the COTs, how we're going to go about rebranding and renaming those units. The Comprehensive Committee met several times this summer, including a major retreat in Helena, compliments of Dean Bingham, and we've had many teleconferences, and we've been working with our communications engagement firm, Strategies 360. And we're planning 2 major summits, a summit at the University of Montana, November 3 and 4, and a summit in Bozeman at MSU, December 15th and 16th. And that's when Andy Goodman from the NPC conference will be joining us for those 2 days to work with Strategies 360, our team, and a larger group on the rebranding and renaming message. A big piece of this work has involved establishing a baseline for where the COTs are today, and that's where I'm going to turn it over to my co-chair, Chancellor Groseth, to give you an update on the work the committee has done in establishing a baseline. Rolf?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Deputy Commissioner. Remember that the reason we're doing this is because we have such great completion rates in our high schools, and we haven't converted that to post-secondary education to the degree that we might. And we're trying to get, both as a state initiative and as a national initiative, more participation in post-secondary education, and we think that the way we can do that is by bringing into balance, according to national standards, the percentages of students who are attending 2-year colleges and those attending 4 years, and in particular, increasing the number at our 2-year campuses with adults and other populations that we've not served. And the board has acted and believes that one strategy in order to do this is to extend what are the traditional missions of a comprehensive 2-year campus to all of our colleges of technology. And during the task force that John mentioned of extending the 2-year mission, comprehensive 2-year mission to all the campuses, we thought that our first task was to do some assessment of the status of the comprehensive mission on each of our campuses, and to just have that as a starting point so we would kind of know where we stood. We relied on the expertise of our already established community colleges. They are already in the main executing each of these 5 missions, and we wanted to measure against the criteria in the Board of Regents statement. At the suggestion of Dr. Seck and with the concurrence of the group, the Commissioner's Office contracted with Dr. Pamela Fisher from Bozeman, a former California community college CEO, and someone who works on the national scene in terms of working with community colleges. And we asked her to develop and conduct and provide analysis for an assessment instrument on the mission status of each of our colleges of technology. So she developed, asked each of the campuses to review and made revisions in this instrument, and in early August did about a 90-minute phone conversation with each of the COT deans, and provided us with draft responses, and there were some corrections of fact, and you now have the report, I think, in front of you. So, but to summarize, I think we found that in developmental education, 3 of our campuses, 3 of our COT campuses are managing that activity directly, and 2 are offering courses by their parent institution in the case of the embeddeds. In adult basic education, as a group, our COTs aren't as involved in this activity, mostly because that's been a long-standing role of our public education sector, and when the VOTEC centers came over to the university system, they were in many of the communities managed together, but they were at that point separated in the late 80s when that happened. We do have some exceptionally good examples, though, of progress as adult basic education has been moved to some of our colleges of technology. The board has heard at previous meetings from Joe Schaefer about the increase in GEDs that have occurred in Great Falls as a result of movement of some of that ABE activity to the College of Technology. In workforce development, most of the campuses are in charge of that activity of the coordination and operation of workforce development. In transfer education, there's great variance in this area between the standalones and the embeddeds. And in the main, the standalones are offering that and controlling that to a greater extent, and on the embedded campuses, a lot of the courses are offered by the 4-year campus and a lot of the general education courses, so that there's still some variation there. And there have been some problems with articulation and also in terms of the 2-year campuses marketing the lower tuition. We saw some of that data this afternoon. In the area of support services, all the COTs implement admissions policies, but the ones which are embedded do so in conjunction with their senior campus, mostly because those student services were brought in and integrated after the restructuring in 1994. So that's a summary of what we found, Mr. Chairman and Deputy Commissioner, and I think there's a great more detail if you want to drill down into it in the report that you've received. We thank Dr. Fisher for her work with us. She really did a nice job, I think, in summarizing and providing some analysis of the data. So I'll turn it back to you, John.
Thank you, Chancellor. Dr. Fisher's report is excellent, and it's definitely worth the read if you take a few moments to read it.
It is good. I read a draft of it without attachments, and it's much more meaningful with the attachments as you referred to them. So I would urge you to read it. It really tells you you really get a handle on 2-year and what we're trying to do here. It really kind of at least it did for me, frame it in a very good way. And the next 2 items on our agenda, which is an update on the planned listing session and rebranding, I'll direct or invite all the people sitting here, and there may be some for people in the room, but there's a schedule regarding our listing session here for you to read. Plus, there's the first version of the College Now newsletter, which is excellent, and an article written by our illustrious chairman, apparently ghosted by someone at OTU. Never mind. Anyway, this is in addition to the brief update John's going to give you on this, but both of them good. One document's obviously the schedule, but the newsletter is, again, quite interesting. And if you want to follow what's going to be a really exciting part of the system for the next few years, there's your first chapter. John?
Thank you, Chairman Barrett. Following our August board meeting, we held two leadership meetings at the invitation of President Engstrom and at the invitation of President Cruzado, which included on the U of M side basically everyone, Helena, Missoula, Montana Tech, and Western. Basically, it was an opportunity to sit down, really roll up our sleeves, take a look at this initiative, and hear any concerns, hear any messages, and I think some key messages that I took away from that meeting, first of all, on the U of M side, was that each of the campuses want to be engaged in the process. They want to be involved every step of the way, and they want to also ensure that the branding, the rebranding, still has a connection with the parent university. And then a couple of weeks later, President Cruzado invited me to Bozeman for a very similar meeting. We had very similar discussions, and an additional couple of comments from President Cruzado and her group. There was strong urging to consider engaging sooner than later Gallatin College programs with Strategy 1. President Cruzado spoke to the fact that she believes Gallatin College programs is really at the stage that it should be, we should start thinking about including it with the other 5 COTs in this effort, and there may be some conversation about that in a few moments. And also the need to make sure that MSU Northern is very visibly included in the branding effort with respect to its College of Technical Sciences and 2-year programs there. Really emanating from those leadership meetings came the listening sessions, which have been scheduled October 3rd in Helena, at Helena COT, October 5th at the MSU Billings COT, October 13th at Missoula and the Missoula COT, and October 17th at Montana Tech and its COT, and then October 19th at the MSU Great Falls COT. And those listening sessions will be organized by Strategies 360, our communications engagement firm, and we're really going to reach out to faculty, staff, students, community, advisory board members, and we really want to hear what they think, what they want to share with respect to extending the comprehensive mission, the rebranding, renaming of the colleges of technology. This initiative is really quite historic and is going to be very exciting to participate in those sessions. So, Chairman Barrett, I'll pause there.
Yeah, excuse me, I guess I'll add, I think we should, if we're going to really give meaning to what we say, we should be having a listening session at MSU, at Northern, and at Western. I mean, if we have 2-year programs there, if we're going to grow them, then we should include them at least in a listening session to hear what they have to say about it. I know it's more to squeeze in. It doesn't have to be on the same schedule, but I think we should strongly consider that.
We did, for example, Mr. Chairman, Regent Barrett, that we did bring up the issue of 2-year in college now when we were at MSU Northern in the listening session we just had. And so we do have feedback from that. We have 4 major topics that we bring up at each of the listening sessions. The ones you're talking about perhaps adding one might be especially focused on that, but I don't think we have to redo ones or have extra ones because we've plugged that in.
Yeah, I was not aware of that, so thank you. Was the same, did you have that kind of feedback at Dillon also? We did. Okay. were going to have an update on the Big Sky Pathways.
Yes, and I'll be asking Assistant Superintendent York to assist with me on this. But as you know, through the Carl Perkins Initiative, we have been forging very strong secondary to post-secondary partnerships for all career paths, and particularly with technical programs. And over the past year, we have developed 480 different pathway templates with secondary schools across Montana. This year, we're planning 8 different workshops across the state this fall, actually, where we will be engaging secondary and post-secondary faculty, counselors, and advisors to take the Pathways concept to the next level. We're bringing in Mr. Gene Benson, who is one of the major architects of the U.S. Department of Education Career Clusters Initiative, and the Office of Public Instruction is a key partner for us in this initiative. And so at this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. York to share a bit more about this.
Let me ask a question, because maybe everybody else knows in the room but me, but explain to me what a pathway template is.
I think maybe we don't quite have the right people here to do that. I can tell you in rough terms, let's put it that way. The template will line out courses that students would take in a specific area, say health science, if they wanted to go into the health sciences. And then those courses would be aligned all the way through 2-year and even up to 4-year degrees, so that there's that immediate link to where they're going between the high school and the college.
Okay, so when you say you have 480 templates, that means you've worked with 480 individual students?
Individual schools.
Pardon?
Schools is what we're talking about, to line out pathways. So a school will...
Schools.
The start of the project, the schools, there are like 16 different pathway areas. Schools will select a pathway and then align with the 2-year institutes on that particular pathway. Some schools have more than one. There's maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 that they have, and that's where the 480 comes from, I believe.
Because we only have like 456 schools or something.
Well, we only have about 170 high schools, but some high schools have 3 or 4 pathways developed. Health sciences, industrial technology,
okay.
Business, that kind of thing.
Okay, now I know what we're talking about. Thank you.
Thanks.
And technically, Mr. Chair, each school could develop upwards of 20 pathways per school. So these are pathways leading to specific educational and career choices for the students.
Great. Once again, I think the key word is transitions. And as I speak about why we would feel, and Superintendent Juneau and the rest of the staff at OPI, as well as educators in Montana and the K-12 system, would think that this is important. Transitions is a key word. You know, by strengthening the relationship between post-secondary and high school instruction, the transition from grade 12 to college really becomes fluid. In fact, we would hope at some point they become intertwined. The pathways allows our youth to plan for the future, for a career, and then work toward that end in a faster pace, a smoother pace. It kind of narrows that canyon between high school and college, and it also really significantly strengthens the bridge that spans that canyon. As we grow this project, we hope to see students that are receiving training in dual fashion. Those that are ready are moving ahead and may well enter into college having completed college courses. Also, you know, we're excited about things like the Digital Academy, which links well with the online classes that the university system has. We're reaching kids in parts of Montana and offering them opportunities that they haven't had before. We feel that this project alone may help us to reduce our non-completion rate. Our kids need relevance in this generation. Pathways gives them relevance. It gives them a goal to shoot the future. It develops relationships. And hopefully, as we link closer and increase our rigor, we can reduce the remediation rates that you see when students come out of our high schools and into our colleges. It's been rewarding to work on this project with OSHE and OPI, and I should mention that we have other partners as well. The Department of Labor is an example. In fact, the Department of Labor has redeveloped their Montana Career Information System. It's a fantastic project and very, very helpful. It allows students to line out pathways from as early as 6th grade. And once a student gets into that system, they're in it for life. That means if they move from Butte to Helena, their file's still there. They graduate high school, it's still there. If they go to work at a lumber mill and the lumber mill closes in 15 years, then that file's still there and they can access it. So we do think that the Big Sky Pathways can play a very vital part in making the College Now initiative successful and help our kids be college and career ready. So we're excited about it. It's been wonderful working with the OSHE team, and we're going to continue. It's something we're committed to. We're not going to back away from this. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions or comments about that from among the board? And you're having some sessions coming up. I mean, the people here aren't going to be attending them, so the dates aren't necessarily important for us, but you have a number of those sessions coming up.
And right. Mr. Chair, the sessions listed on the handout are for the Big Sky Pathways, are specifically for secondary teachers, post-secondary teachers, counselors, and advisors.
All right, thank you. It's about 20 minutes to 5. John, how long a presentation did Joe and did they have? Is it a 20-minute or half an hour, an hour? I know you let them off the hook, but we could put them back on if we could want to get it done. I don't know the length of it.
Actually,
I don't want to cut them short.
Mr. Chair, I think given the fact that they have a number of balls in the fire, or I guess they're juggling a number of balls, excuse me, and along with their committee, and so that was, I'll never live that down, and Sue Jones, who is working with them, I think they will have a significantly larger report in November. So,
all right, thank you, Dan.
And richer report in November. And if I may make just a final comment on the rebranding.
Of course.
That I forgot to make. And it goes back to a conversation I had with 3 community college presidents last night. And that is a lot of discussion and attention with our communications engagement firm, which has only been on board now for about 2.5 months, has been centered around the rebranding of the colleges of technology, but a very important piece of what we will be working on over the next 3 years involves lifting awareness and respect and overall appreciation for all of two-year education in Montana. So that will be a major goal for our strategic communications initiative as well.
Thank you. Is there any comments on anything we discussed from among the board? Is there any public comment for any items that were on the, or not on this topic, but not on the agenda for the two-year education community college committee? Mr. Chairman?
I think what we'll do then is quickly call for public comment on items not on today's agenda. We'll have an opportunity tomorrow as well. In case people are leaving the meeting today, is there any public comment on items not on today's agenda? Public comment? All right, then please.
Kevin Nelson from here in Billings. This is comments from the the Flathead meeting were a little disturbing to me, and I thought there was probably a little bit of pent-up anger that when you are, you were doing your tuition right then, and the legislature had just adjourned, and maybe there were some comments among this body that I thought were somewhat inappropriate, but so this might get a little political, but I think those comments were also political. But first of all, what I'd like to say is, if you feel a need to pursue the cabin lease dollar monies that was in the paper the other day, I would also ask you, if you're going to do that, would you please then, along with that, pursue the VOTEC and community college dollars that are diverted in a tax increment finance district. The Constitution states that the funds of the Montana University system and all other state institutions of learning for whatever source occurring shall remain forever inviolated, sacred to the purpose for which they were dedicated. Currently, there's about $165,000 statewide that are being diverted, that are assessed at a local level for the community colleges, and that money, I feel, is in violation of the Constitution. The university mills, they are not diverted, so we're in conflict. I don't think anyone wants to argue that our VOTECs are not part of our university system. Furthermore, we hear constantly about the need for financial dollars into our school systems. And we consistently hear the fact that our K-12 are not prepared to move into our university systems without remedial needs, which further burdens this body on how do we get these students up there? How do we get them ready? And when they come, how much more money are we spending getting them ready so they can move on? That brings me to the next issue. Currently, right now, $4 million is being diverted, again, in tax increment finance, and those comes from the 95 mills that are assessed to every property owner in the state for support of base education funding. I believe those mills should not be diverted because those are the monies that we need to provide the funds to educate the kids so when they come to here, they're a little more ready. Locally, they lose about $8 million statewide. So that's $15 million that's getting lost that has to be made up someplace. There was some statute, some laws that got passed, or that luckily the governor vetoed. Was Senate Bill 358 that wanted to expand these districts. The governor recognized this, and he said without essential sideboards, he cannot approve this Senate Bill 358. And the first bullet point he talked about was the bill endangers the adequate funding of schools in Montana in accordance with our constitutional equalization standards. That money is set aside for equality and base aid education, and that $4 million is being diverted, which further burdens you to further provide additional funds up here. One of the other concerns is just, you sit here and you listen to this and you go, this doesn't make sense. We go from K-12 through higher education and we still need workforce training? What have we been doing? Workforce training is just base training for just people just to go into just a basic job. And I think we have a real concern. If we really need workforce housing, we spend all this money educating these kids, I think we need to refocus. What are we doing? What are we teaching? Why are they not ready for basic workforce jobs? There was, like I said, we had bills up there that would have addressed some of these issues. But there was contingents up there that would not let this go through, and it's not who you think it was. So I would ask you to Go get your money that is due you, and other states are taking a hard look at these tax increment finance districts. California, Chicago, Colorado, Oregon, they're all recognizing the fact that these instruments of these taxing districts are taking a lot of funds from schools, and a lot of these states are saying, you know, wait a minute, we've got to look at this. So if the other states are looking at it, I think it's well within the realm of this state to also look at it before it gets to the point where it got to other points in the state, other states and cities, that it just became a massive drain of dollars. So.
Thank you. The $165,000 VOTEC money you're talking about, are you referring to the $1.5 million levy? That's
probably where it's coming from. I mean, I don't know where that really money, this is a DOR report that all they do is list this $165,000, but it comes from, you know, Great Falls, Kalispell, Billings, Missoula. So those are, my understanding, locally assessed dollars for support of community colleges. But since it's a locally assessed mill, for some reason it's getting captured. In direct contrast of the university mills that aren't getting captured.
Okay.
So.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks.
Is there other public comment? And again, we'll have time tomorrow if...
I'm Dave Beck from the University of Montana.
Dr. Beck?
And I apologize because I didn't jump up earlier during the comment in the academic committee. But I'd like to commend you all for taking on the issue, looking at the issue, I mean, of student loans and the problems that student loans can cause for both students and communities are kind of a long-time concern of mine. I've worked in Indian country for 25 years, and I've lived in Montana for 11 years, which is highly rural. And I think that student loans disadvantage students for the long term when they take out heavy loans. But I also think that they're disinvestments in the future for the communities that they come from, and they lead to underdevelopment of those communities because so many dollars that students earn in not necessarily high-paying jobs leave those communities because of loans. So I would also urge you to try to figure out a way to bring Montana's level down lower in that area. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Any other public comment?
Hello, I'm Grace Horman. I'm from right here. As you can imagine, as a current student, the discussion on student loans is of particular interest to me. I would suggest that perhaps part of the reason the student loans are increasing is that many more students are supporting themselves in college, are getting perhaps less support from their family or no support at all. I would also suggest that there's been a little bit of instability for students in financial aid recently. You don't always know what financial aid you're going to get or what the amounts are. So when you're offered a sum larger than perhaps you need, and then you go to the bookstore or wherever and you find out that one textbook will be $175 this semester, I can tell you it's more than tempting to take a little extra. So I would just suggest that maybe we look more at the students' finances rather than the families and assess from that angle. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other public comment? All right, a couple schedule items then. I think we have moved the long-range building discussion from what was later at one point in time to right after the breakfast tomorrow. So if community leaders that are attending the breakfast want to stick around for the long-range building discussion, they certainly can. So that'll start at 8:15. We have it scheduled till 9:40. I don't think it'll take that long. So probably by 9:15, we're hopeful to break there. We will do the board picture and at that point in time move into executive session. We have the executive session agenda posted on our agenda, and as presiding officer determined that the demands of individual privacy on these matters exceeds the merits of public disclosure, so we'll close the meeting at that point. And once that is done, it certainly could be after 10 o'clock, but hopefully as soon after as we can get back here, we'll reconvene in open session and hopefully conclude our meeting on time. With that, I would ask Chancellor Groseth if we have any further announcements or directions on where we are to go. Well, maybe let's keep that as benign as possible.
You closed that door a little too quickly. We want to invite all of you to a reception at the College of Technology this evening, which is out on Shiloh and Central. I have maps here for those of you who don't know how to get there, and we'll be starting as soon as you get there.
All right, thank you. We will recess till tomorrow morning.